Chapter 335. He had always regarded Dake as a competitor that he had to catch up with. However, they had never had a chance to duel each other, whether it was during the class competition, the recruitment competition, or the newcomer competition. Victor was basically killed by the other students in the process of climbing up the stairs. The only time he had a duel was when he had just finished refining the troll, and when he met him in the secret tunnel. Thinking about this, White's heart felt heavy. He reached out and pressed the magic card in his hand. With a 1-star magic guide spirit replacing the magic guide ball, and the Archmage himself as the main body of the duel, most people would probably choose the magic beast, right? Thinking about it, how long had it been since he had summoned it? On the other side, Dake was ready. Remember, https://m, VIP can't you? VIP. The Shungmalian classroom was spacious, but it was still too small for a duel if it was limited to the area around the podium. Fortunately, this was only a demonstration in class. The purpose was not to win. Dake didn't care too much. In fact, he only put a few fantasy beasts back into the magic card. Seeing that the two were in position, Professor Cheong-si took out a silence card and said solemnly, "Next, I'll use the silence card. When the sound disappears, the duel will begin." Okay. Dake nodded to Professor Cheong-si. White also nodded quickly. Got it. Professor Cheong-si raised the silence card high and looked at the audience. The students who were whispering suddenly quieted down. Ai Ma, who was sitting in the front row, carefully held a magic card in her hand and looked at White cautiously. After the prophecy, in the astronomy class, most of the students had a slight change in their view of White. After that, White and Luo both also studied seriously and didn't get their credits deducted because of their frequent tardiness. The students' perception of him gradually returned to normal. As a result, he began to look forward to the hero's son again. Humans were, in fact, quite forgetful. They tend to focus on the present rather than the past. He was more lenient to those who changed their ways and was stricter to those who made mistakes by chance. During this period, White had gained the favor of some students of the Academy of Knights, and they had more interactions with each other. At this time, they had even more expectations for his performance. Of course, the students of the aristocratic academy stood firmly on Dake's side. They felt that there was no suspense in the outcome of this silent duel. Luo Boat was the only one who whispered worriedly, no way, White wouldn't use the holy sword in this kind of situation, right? Logically speaking, he's not the kind of person who can't distinguish between right and wrong, but the look in his eyes. I don't think so, right? On the podium. After White Gouda nodded, he took a deep breath and stared intently at Dake. His brain was already working at high speed when he was called on the podium. He was very clear that there was still a large gap between himself and Dake Dimeng. Perhaps the Holy Sword curse that had already been cast could make up for it, but to rely on an equipment card to reverse the situation in a formal duel was undoubtedly a pipe dream. But what if it was a silent duel? Restrictions on the starting point, restrictions on the level. Of course, a normal silent duel wouldn't have restrictions on the level of the magic elf card, but this duel would be held in a classroom. In order to not cause any damage, Professor Cheong-si had clearly stipulated that high-level magic elves couldn't be summoned. This gave him a chance. White's mind spun. Dake Dimeng's biggest advantage over the first years was that they had a large number of second-tier magic elves. Most of the first years, including him, didn't have the ability to refine second-tier magic elves. But now this advantage had been leveled. White's eyes flashed and he suddenly held his breath. A sound. It disappeared in an instant. It's starting. Dake Dimeng hooked his finger and raised the magic elf card in his hand slightly. The silence card's activation was very obvious. In a noisy environment, a human's sensitivity to sound would decrease. But once the sound completely disappeared, all the senses would produce a stress response, causing a person to instantly become conscious. Dake's reaction was very fast. In the blink of an eye, he had already begun to silently chant the incantation of the normal summoning spell. The silent chant did indeed slow down his summoning speed, but in reality, it wasn't that slow. He was still able to quickly complete the summoning. When the magic elf card in his hand gradually lit up, White's magic elf card still didn't have any luster. Immediately after, Fantasy beast. Ibu jumped out from the card and intimately called out to it. Of course, there was no sound. In that instant, Ibu-chan revealed a coquettish, shocked, and terrified expression. It wasn't until Dake winked at it that it came back to its senses. It took small steps to his side and stuck close to him. The successive changes in its expression and actions made the hearts of the girls in the front row melt. Because Ibu would attend astronomy class with everyone every Wednesday night, the first-year students were already very familiar with it. Occasionally, someone would even feed it before and after class. Although Ibu tried very hard to refuse, the more it was like this, the more people couldn't resist it. Now that it was frowning and showing a pitiful look, it immediately resonated with a lot of people. Finally, White finished silently chanting the normal summoning spell. The magic elf card in his hand emitted a faint white light, and a long-awaited deer of light appeared in front of him. This is because they hadn't seen this stag for so long. Quite a few of the little magisters actually didn't recognize it as White's fantasy beast. After the stag was summoned, it sniffed hard twice and then stomped on the ground with its front hooves. The silence was better than any sound. Good fellow, is it boiling with battle intent? White couldn't help but reach out to touch the stag's back. But just as he was about to touch it, the stag shook hard and pushed his hand back. White jerked his hand back, a little embarrassed. Fortunately, it wasn't obvious in the silent environment. His face paled slightly, but he immediately put this matter to the back of his mind and focused on the silent duel. In the rules of the silent duel, the one-star magic elf summoned at the start was the default replacement for the magisters. Then, the real duel would begin. Seeing that Dake wasn't in a hurry to attack, White gritted his teeth and reached out to pull out one of his trump cards, the Radiant Python. As a 3-star magic elf, the Radiant Python had high attributes of 1,400 on 3 sides. Although it was slightly inferior to the troll, it was still a 3-star overlord magic elf. In this small space, the Radiant Python as a snake had an easier time than the troll. Only when he started summoning did Dake leisurely take out a second magic card. Dake had some guesses as to which magic elf White could summon. In short, it was a choice between the troll and the Radiant Python. Unless he refined a new magic guiding fairy, these 2 magic guiding fairies would have to take turns. He didn't think too much about it, and directly summoned Meow Meow. Although it was a beat slower, both magic elves were summoned at almost the same time. Finally, the gigantic Radiant Python attracted more attention. The giant python, as thick as a water bucket, raised its head, its delicate snake scales reflecting a clear white light under the room's light, and the snow-white gem on its head emitted a warm jade-like light. Although it was a reptile known for its cold-bloodedness, the Radiant Python's slender eyes contained a water-like gentleness. Without a doubt, it was synonymous with beauty and holiness. Compared to White's other magic elf, the troll, it was the complete opposite. And the Meow Meow that Dake summoned had inherited the usual style of his magic elf, so cute that it made people want to hug it tightly. The last time Meow Meow appeared was in the street duel on Valentine's Day. But at that time, Meow Meow wasn't the main character, so no one noticed how much power was hidden in this petite magic elf's body. The soundless environment made Meow Meow's hair stand on end, but the meow it let out was like a stone sinking into the sea, without causing any ripples. Confused, it could only turn its head to look at its master, its half-opened eyes revealing a doubtful light. Dake made an okay gesture, then pointed at White's stag, and with a forceful chop on its neck, he signaled to behead. Meow Meow calmed down, and immediately turned to look at the opposite side. A giant python with a huge body and a pure prey. It raised its claws, stuck out its tongue, and licked it, revealing a greedy bloodthirst. Then Meow Meow, whose magic power and attack were both at the peak of 1500, suddenly darted out before the Radiant Python started to move. For felines, hunting was a natural instinct engraved in their bones. It stretched its body in the air, and from beginning to end, it was terrifyingly coordinated. In the blink of an eye, it crossed the distance between the 2 sides. Then, without paying any attention to the clumsy giant python, it spun on its feet, and with a Z shake, it flashed past the Radiant Python and pounced on the stag behind it. At that moment, White couldn't help but open his mouth and shout. He obviously wanted to shout out the Radiant Python's ultimate skill, Sacred Light, but under the cover of the silence card, no sound came out. Humans were like this. Even if they knew they couldn't make a sound, they wouldn't shut their mouths. White, who realized that he couldn't make a sound, couldn't help but anxiously look at the back of the Radiant Python, hoping that his thoughts could be transmitted through the connection between the Magister and the magic elf. But the Radiant Python didn't meet his expectations. When Meow Meow passed by, it instinctively raised its snake tail and lashed out. But it was a whole beat slower, and it didn't even hit Meow Meow's shadow. The Radiant Python's long tail landed heavily on the ground. As the ground trembled, Meow Meow's 4 legs exerted force and pounced again. It stretched its limbs in the air, and its slightly raised right claw suddenly popped out sharp dagger-like nails, aiming precisely at the stag's neck. But the stag, whose nostrils were constantly breathing out, reacted quickly and raised its head. Its huge antlers flashed with white light, and then suddenly exploded. Ultimate skill, Light of the Soul. No one was more familiar with this ultimate skill than Dake. The Light of the Soul, which could express the power of the soul, had once helped him awaken the demoness beast that had been corrupted by the moon goddess. The upper limit of this ultimate skill depended on the strength of the Magister's soul. It was a typical soul skill that would be amplified by the Magister's thoughts and emotions. As the son of the hero, White should be able to obtain good results if he could use the light of the soul well, and inject his courage into it. Unfortunately, without the amplification of the Magister's soul, the light of the soul was only an ordinary ultimate skill released by a 1-star magic elf. Meow Meow was illuminated by the light of the soul, but it didn't feel any heat at all. It endured the light, narrowed its eyes slightly, and broke through the light. Its sharp cat claws tore open the phantasmal beast, stag's throat. The stag tried to let out a scream, but even without the silence card, the phantasmal beast with magic attack and defense of 100, 200, and 100 couldn't make a sound after taking Meow Meow's claw. Meow Meow's agile body landed lightly on the ground, and the stag behind it instantly exploded into particles of light. White, who had just grasped Troll and Holy Sword Curse in his hands, met the gray cat's eyes as it raised its head slightly. The trace of disdain that flashed through the cat's eyes made the sensitive White feel a stabbing pain in his soul. He clenched his teeth and had the impulse to summon Troll and tear it apart. But the ripples that flowed back from Holy Sword Curse calmed his emotions, even though he hadn't done anything at all. But reality was different. The duel was over. There were slightly noisy voices all around. Suddenly, they poured into his ears. His brain was starting to feel tired after processing the large amount of sound. A very good demonstration. After Professor Cheong-si removed the silence card, she clapped her hands and silenced the noisy little magisters. Her voice was always more effective than the silence card to silence people. The 2 students' silent incantations when they couldn't make a sound were both very good. White Gouda, in particular, was even better than I expected. So White Gouda, 5 extra points. As soon as she finished speaking, the students of the Night Academy started clapping one after another. White's mouth was half open as he received the applause and extra points. But for some reason, he felt uncomfortable listening to Professor Cheong-si's praise. Then Professor Cheong-si said, "On the other hand, Dake Diming's communication with the enchanted fairy was very clear. With just a few glances and gestures, the enchanted fairy calmed down and correctly understood his intentions. It must have required a lot of tacit understanding. In a silent duel, this is indeed an effective method. 10 extra points for Dake Diming. 2 and 1 4100 plus. It's the end of the month. Throw in some free tickets. *3, epsilon*. Chapter 336. As the applause grew louder, Dake and White walked through the aisles and returned to their seats. In fact, the 2's demonstration did have a very good demonstration effect. One was front while the other was back. The 2 points that one needed to pay attention to in a silent duel were perfectly displayed. Professor Cheong-si then explained in detail the problems they showed in the duel. The students gradually shifted their focus from the duel demonstration to the acquisition of knowledge. The silent duel demonstration ended faster than they expected, but it seemed to be the essence of a silent duel, to determine the winner in a short and quick duel in a silent environment. Even though they didn't need to use it now, when they were allowed to enter the dungeon, the silent duel would become an important tool to resolve disputes in the dungeon. After White sat down, Earbook couldn't help but say, "Don't be discouraged, Dake's magic elf is too exceptional. I thought you wouldn't be able to resist using the Holy Sword curse." White smiled awkwardly and said, "Why would I use the Holy Sword curse during the demonstration? I'm not as good as him now, but as long as I keep working hard, I'll catch up." Earbook clenched his fist and encouraged her. "Of course I believe in you. After all, Professor Midya said that you're a future hero." Werther sighed and muttered softly, "The future hero can't become a hero just by sitting down. Is it the dungeon? I heard that the senior students obtained their core materials from the dungeon." Earbook, "What did you say?" White, "No, nothing." After returning to his seat, Dake casually whispered a few words to Deanna and continued to listen to the lecture. He roughly understood the key to a silent duel. In addition to the silence, the biggest feature of a silent duel was that a one-star magic elf could be used as a substitute for the magic ball. A one-star magic elf was usually very weak. If the summoned magic elf had an AoE sure kill skill, it would be easy to kill it in one move. Or he could choose an assassin-type high-speed magic elf, avoid a direct confrontation, and assassinate that one-star magic elf. In short, this was also an effective way of thinking. In such a fast-paced duel, spending a large amount of time to summon a high-star magic guiding spirit was very undesirable. At the same time, it also avoided the large commotion caused by summoning a high-star magic guiding spirit. Also, before engaging in a silent duel, it was best to communicate with the magic guiding fairies in advance, so that they could understand the pattern and rules of the duel, and be able to act on their own after being summoned. Although a normal magic elf only had 2.0 intelligence, it still had the basic intelligence to understand commands and could set up tactics in advance. Thus, a silent duel was like a prearranged battle formation. The Archmage would summon the magic fairy, and the magic fairy would act according to the battle plan. The final result would be a direct collision between battle plans. The duel class ended with the little magisters still wanting to continue. Some of them had almost forgotten that the dungeon adventure was about to begin. An interesting class was so attractive. But when the bell rang, the students' brain circuits seemed to have switched gears in an instant, and they were all excited again. The dungeon was an unusually important part of the academy. It was located there from the entrance. It would be a lie to say that they were not curious. Usually at this time, logic would tell them that the dungeon was dangerous, and that Professor Nini was unreliable. But their emotions would tell them that the dungeon was interesting and the adventure was exciting. Moreover, they had been studying magical beasts for 2 months and more or less had some understanding of the magical beasts in the dungeon. And everyone had a full set of magic cards in their hands. Some students even secretly fantasized about stepping forward bravely after encountering a magical beast and hunting it as an adventurer. If they successfully hunted a magical beast on their first adventure, it might become something they could brag about for the rest of their lives. In short, according to Professor Nini's notice, a large number of students rushed directly to the assembly point at the entrance of the castle, and their faces were full of excitement. As for their dual textbooks, of course, they had asked a small number of students to bring them back to the dormitory. Dake was holding Deanna and Luoc textbooks in his hands. He very generously accepted the request of the two of them, and returned to the dormitory at a moderate pace. When he reached the dormitory, he put away the textbooks and then wrapped the multi-layered lunchbox that he had prepared with a picnic tablecloth. In his empty backpack, he put in more apple juice and milkweed juice. He also brought along a pen and paper for recording, a picture book for sketching, and a variety of survival tools. Among them, the most important one was a magic needle that was specially used in the dungeon. The magnetic field in the dungeon was chaotic, and a compass could not be used. But there was a special magic mark at the entrance of every level. Using the magic needle to record the magic power of the mark, one could always determine the direction of the entrance. This was a powerful tool for finding the way in the dungeon. Usually, every team that entered the dungeon would bring along a map recorder with a good sense of direction. If they really got lost, then they could only take the initiative to activate the dungeon escape device called the dungeon escape device. But that thing was a little expensive. I wonder if Professor Nini has prepared a dungeon escape device for us. Dake thought as he picked a palm-sized book and put it in his backpack, preparing to kill time during lunch. When everything was ready, he turned around and said to the eagerly waiting magic guide elves, "So, which one of you is willing to travel with me?" The magic guide elves glanced at the small but full backpack behind him, and immediately understood his bad intentions. But even so, the excitement of being able to travel with their master still overshadowed the unhappiness of needing a backpack. Me, Fairy Ibu was the first to raise its tentacles. But Dake shook his head, indicating that it did not meet the requirements. Fairy Ibu immediately showed a disappointed expression. After its application failed, little Ibu, who was eager to give it a try, couldn't help but shrink back. On the other side, Kettle Dream Demon, Chio Sea Lion, and Trash Slime, which were not convenient to carry a backpack, all retreated. Among the remaining magic guide elves, the deluded beast's mouth raised in an unconcealable arc. Then it quietly took half a step forward, making itself stand out even more. Quickly choose me, quickly choose me. Hatcha. Moo. Who would have thought that the Hawkman and the Milkkin would suddenly raise their wings and hooves, patting their chests to show that they were up to the task. And the little demon beast was watching coldly from its perch. Every time this happened, it would feel proud of its advantage as a familiar. Finally, seeing that Dake was about to choose one of the Hawkman and the milk can, the deluded beast could not help but raise its hand and blurt out, "Me." Dake smiled and looked at it, quickly saying, "Then let's choose the deluded beast." Actually, he wanted to choose the deluded beast from the start. But as a magister who specialized in education, he deeply understood the principle of a bowl of water being equal. Moreover, the backpack was indeed a difficult task. If the magic guide elves volunteered, then of course it would be better. Although the other magic guide elves felt that it was a pity, the deluded beast really had the feeling of a big sister in Dorm 201. If it was chosen, then it could only accept it wholeheartedly. Dake clearly understood the thoughts of the magic guide elves. Then he recalled the rest of the magic guide elves into the magic guide card, and then solemnly put Paradise into the card bag. No one knew what would happen in this half-a-day tour of the underground city. So bringing Paradise would be more stable. In addition, he also had the thought of using the evolved form of Trash Slime. Greedy Slime Eye. Ever since Greedy Slime 2 evolved Trash Slime Eye into Greedy Slime Eye, Dake did not have the chance to use its ultimate skill, treasure sniffing. If he could find a chance to use it, perhaps there would be unexpected gains. Obviously, even Dake could not avoid the additional fantasy of this underground city adventure. After securing the card pack, he personally placed the packed little bag on the Delu beast's shoulder. Then he waved his hand at the little fiend beast and handed over the multi-layered lunchbox that was wrapped in a tablecloth. The little demon beast grabbed the lunchbox and flapped its wings to the left of the deluded beast. Dake looked at the tamed demon and magic guide elves with satisfaction and said, "Then let's go." But as soon as his voice fell, a sense of déjà vu suddenly appeared in his mind. This scene, where did he see it before? For Dake Dimming, whose mana recovery speed exceeded the human limit, maintaining the mana consumption of a 4-star magic guide elves for a long time was a relatively easy task. Dake hid the deluded beast magic guide card in his sleeve, and through skin contact, he would constantly replenish his mana. As a tamed demon, the little demon beast did not need to replenish its mana to move freely. He brought the 2 magic guide elves and quickly arrived at the entrance of the castle. "Dake, you're finally here." After Deanna and Luosi saw him, their eyes lit up and they trotted over. Dark looked at the two of them and found that although the 2 girls were still wearing their school uniforms, they were wearing cute accessories subtly, which reflected their inner expectations for this spring outing. As for the 2 girls' backpack, it was indeed on Deanna's back. Her backpack was stuffed with food and drinks, and it was estimated to be at least twice as heavy as Dake's. But Deanna's backpack was as light as a feather. At this time, people couldn't help but sigh. As expected of the bear of the kingdom, Deanna looked at Dake's deluded beast with envy and pouted. "If only I had that much mana." Luosi grabbed her hand and said with a smile, "Don't be envious, your mana is already very strong. Moreover, if you really want to be envious, you should be envious of Dake's tame demon. Like my rabbit, at most it can send a letter." Deanna muttered, "My panda can be used as a pillow." Dake had always attracted a lot of attention. When he arrived, the little magisters would more or less look in his direction. Then their attention would be attracted by the two magic guide elves, one white and one black. After that, it was as if a box had been opened in everyone's mind, and they were suddenly enlightened. They could not learn the existence of the deluded beast. But the existence of the little demon beast could be completely imitated. Therefore, one by one, the students also summoned their own tame demons. In the academy, because the academy's rules explicitly prohibited students from summoning their tame demons in the hallways, although it was often ignored, it was rare to see someone like Dake who frequently used his tame demons. Now that the tamed demons were summoned one by one, the remaining space between the crowd was instantly filled. This made it even more lively. Dake observed the students' tamed demons, and was somewhat amazed. Although the tamed demons were mainly small in size, there were always exceptions. The students' tamed demons were all strange, and made people gasp in amazement. Suddenly, he shifted his gaze and saw that White and Luo Boat had also summoned their own tamed demons. Because he had not seen them for so long, he had almost forgotten what their tamed demons looked like. White's tamed demon was a knee-high minotaur. Although it looked small, it seemed to have the necessary strength. Probably because there were troll, two-headed ogre, goblin warrior, and other magic guide elves in her magic guide elven card. White's initial rejection of the minotaur gradually weakened. Gradually, she was able to look at her tamed demons with a normal attitude. It was just that this minotaur was too short. When it carried the backpack, it could directly drag it on the ground. Luo Boat's tamed demon was a round-headed robot. Its hands were multifunctional arms that could transform into various tools, and its lower body was crawler-type wheels. It looked very useful. The two hung their backpacks on the robot tamed demon, and felt very relaxed. Ding-ling-ling. When the class bell rang at 10 o'clock sharp, Professor Nini, who was already at the venue, asked the college representatives to confirm the number of students. She said excitedly, "You have to listen to me and not run around in the dungeon." "Oh yes, college representatives, please come up. I've rented a batch of dungeon escape devices. Everyone wear them on your wrists." Looks like Professor Nini didn't forget about the dungeon escape devices. What's with renting them? Dake was taken aback. "Do we have to hand in the dungeon escape devices after the adventure?" Looking at Professor Nini's pained expression, Dake felt that it was true. This batch of dungeon escape devices was most likely rented by Professor Nini using her own academic credits. As a professor, it was really embarrassing. The temporary representative of the aristocrat house was a girl who often sat in the front row. She asked a few students to help and distributed the dungeon escape devices. Dake studied it carefully after receiving it. The dungeon escape device looked like a wristwatch that could be worn on the wrist. There was a cover at the top of the wristwatch that could be opened with a little force. The material of the cover itself didn't seem to be hard, and could be easily broken. When the cover was opened, one could see a button inside. It was obviously a manual trigger. It could be activated passively or proactively. It could be activated with mana or manually. This was the specialty of the dungeon escape device. But it shouldn't be necessary, right? 2-in-1 4200 plus. Chapter 337. After all the students had put on the dungeon escape device, Professor Nini led them to the entrance of the dungeon. It was near the forest that was about a kilometer away from the castle. After walking for 15 minutes, they could see the round Roman palace-style building. The whole building only had 2 floors, but each floor was extremely tall. Stone pillars that were engraved with historical traces were arranged around the first floor of the building. As they walked closer, they could see the lifelike monster carvings on the stone pillars, as if they would come to life at any time. Although the first-year students had looked at this building from afar, it was the first time they had come close to it. This building that hid the entrance of the dungeon was actually of the same style as the open-air arena. but the style of the building in front of them was obviously more rugged. They walked through the stone pillars and entered the spacious passageway. They continued to walk forward in a straight line. After a few minutes, they could enter the interior of the building and see an extremely spacious open-air plaza. But the first thing that caught their eyes was not the entrance of the dungeon, but the huge stone statue that stood in the middle of the plaza. Remember the URL. MVIP, can't you? VIP Professor, what is that? Luobot, who was walking in front, pointed at the nearest giant statue and couldn't help but ask. The students behind also couldn't help but stop and look over. Professor Nini was walking in the front and was in high spirits. At this time she casually said, "A giant statue." Luobot's face instantly darkened and complained, "Professor, I know that is a giant statue." Professor Nini lowered her head and looked at him with a puzzled face. "Then why are you asking me?" Luobot. When he was silent, Professor Nini had already skipped out of the passageway. She said excitedly, we're here. Everyone can sit down and rest for a while. You can also look around, but don't run around. At about 10:30, we will officially enter the dungeon." The students surged out of the passageway like a school of fish. Dake, Deanna, and Luosi walked in the middle and just followed the flow of people into the plaza. Then they found a stone bench and sat down. The little fiend beast that had been flying for half an hour with the lunch box in its hand quickly landed beside him. It was so tired that it was panting. The Diru beast glanced at it in disdain, then looked around curiously. It had less experience than the little magisters, so it was even more curious. The huge stone statues standing in the middle of the square also attracted its attention. Beside him, Dake's gaze passed through the statues and observed the so-called dungeon entrance from afar. Before the entrance to the underground city was opened, it was only a 20-meter-tall arched door. The doorpost was square in cross-section, and its surface was engraved with incantation-like patterns. The door was more than 10 meters wide. The thickness of the doorpost was about 5 meters, and there was a groove on the inner side of the doorpost. He could roughly imagine that once the gate was opened, mana would be released from the ravine and form a magic gate. Every Friday between 12 o'clock noon and 12 o'clock midnight on Sunday, there would always be a large number of students entering from the front and exiting from the back. Then if the entrance to the underground city was open like this, who would be guarding it? Dake's gaze couldn't help but turn to the huge stone statues. 1, 2, 3, a total of 12 statues. Each of the 12 colossal statues had a different appearance. Among them, there were soldiers holding spears and monsters with lion heads and human bodies. The only similarity was that each statue was more than 10 meters tall. The tallest one was even taller than the doorpost, more than 20 meters. Once they moved, it was hard to imagine. Dake's pupils shrank as his gaze fell on a giant statue with wings and a scepter in its hand. It looked like an angel. In the teachings of the saint, angels had always appeared in the image of asexual creatures. On the surface, it was to promote the purity of angels. But this giant statue that looked like an angel had distinct female characteristics. If this was placed in the saint, it would be considered heresy. I wonder which era this building and those colossal statues came from. Dake couldn't help but fall into deep thought. HM? It wasn't until the Dilu beast pulled the corner of his clothes that he suddenly woke up. It was time. All the students of the 4 departments gathered again, each of them maintaining a certain degree of excitement. The underground city was right in front of them, and their first adventure was about to come true. Professor Nini walked in front of the arched door and reached out to pat the doorpost. It was unknown what method she used, but that arched door was just as Dake thought, with a large amount of magic surging out. Soon, the magic released from the doorpost formed a water curtain-like magic door. Professor Nini pointed at the magic door and explained, "This is the entrance to the underground city. After entering from here, you will arrive at the hall of the first floor of the underground city. We usually call it the reception hall, where the underground city welcomes guests." A girl from the magic department nervously said, "Professor, there won't be monsters in the reception hall, right?" Professor Nini glanced at her and said, "I should have said that before. There is a special magic mark at the entrance of every floor of the underground city. The magic waves released from the mark will have a repelling effect on monsters, so the entrance is generally safer. Of course, repelling isn't a ban, and the entrance can't completely prevent monsters from invading. So it's still better to be careful. The girl from the magic department quickly nodded. Professor Nini raised her chin in satisfaction and said to the students, "I'll go in first to explore, you all wait a moment." As soon as she finished speaking, she had already strode into the magic door. A wave of ripples appeared on the door, and her huge body was completely swallowed up. But before the students could feel nervous, Professor Nini had already walked out from the other side of the door. She then went around the doorpost and walked back to the front. She made a hand gesture and revealed a big smile. "It's safe." Professor Nini still led the way, and the students behind her carefully stepped in. If there was a first, there would be a second. Even the less courageous students successfully stepped through the door under the guidance of the collective will. Dake followed the crowd in, and the first thing he saw was the magic mark, in the middle of the reception room. It was a sculpture that looked like a mermaid floating on top of an altar. He thought for a moment and took out the magic needle from the backpack on the Diru beast's back. Then he walked towards the mermaid sculpture that was emitting a faint blue light. Unexpectedly, there were many students walking towards the mermaid sculpture at the same time as him. He looked around and found that most of the students were from the magic department. Of course, there were also students from other departments, but there weren't many. More than 10 people looked at each other and smiled. They all surrounded the mermaid sculpture and began to collect the magic of the mermaid sculpture. AI Ma from the night department and Sarah from the magic department were also among them. Professor Nini looked at the actions of Dake and the others. Her not very bright head spun for a long time before she suddenly realized that she didn't teach this part of the content. She quickly searched the small backpack on her back, but she didn't find the magic needle. That didn't actually exist. Probably because she never got lost in the dungeon, Professor Nini didn't use the magic needle, and naturally ignored it subconsciously. However, she thought for a moment and took out a magic tool that looked like a key. Then she hopped in front of the mermaid sculpture. Then she clapped her hands and gathered the students. Dake had just finished collecting the magic. He put away the magic needle and looked up at Professor Nini. He originally thought that Professor Nini was going to talk about the magic needle. He didn't expect Professor Nini to just mention it and skip over the matter. Then she took out the magic tool that looked like a key and waved it in front of the students. Seeing the confused expressions of the students, Professor Nini couldn't help but proudly say, "Does anyone know what this is?" Since no one knows, Professor Nini, is that the key to the door? Saraswati from the School of Magical Devices answered without any emotional intelligence. Professor Nini was speechless. She subconsciously shrank her neck and quickly corrected herself. "That's right. This is the key to the door. It's also called the floor key. It's an exclusive tool in the dungeon. As long as the key is activated in front of the magic marker at the entrance of each floor, you can directly teleport to the corresponding floor. The number 18 is engraved on the key in Nini's hand. It means that this is the key to teleport to the 18th floor." White, who was more concerned about the rules of the dungeon, was shocked. "There's such a convenient tool in the dungeon?" Professor Nini chuckled. "Of course. Our Shangmalian dungeon is bottomless. It's impossible to go back and forth in a day or two. It's because of the key that we can complete a certain scale of adventure in just a weekend." Dake was curious. "Then, Professor, what's the cooldown time of this key? How many people can it teleport at the same time each time?" Professor Nini raised 3 fingers. "The cooldown time is only 1 hour. After an hour, you can use it again after replenishing your magic power. As for the number of people you can teleport, Dake, 30 people? No." Professor Nini shook her head and said, "It's 3 people. One key can only teleport 3 people at a time. To teleport more people, you'll need the advanced version of the key, the door crystal." Dake was curious. "What's the door crystal?" Professor Nini said, "The door crystal is the advanced version of the key. Its full name is the Dungeon Portal Crystal. It can teleport 30 people at a time. The cooldown time is 3 hours. After each use, It requires a large amount of magic power to be replenished, and it's very rare. Dake. Then, how can we get the key and the door crystal? Can we buy them from Traveler's Street? Professor Nini said. That's one way. Some students will sell the key and the door crystal in Traveler's Street after they get it from the dungeon, but it's a little expensive. Of course, the most important way to get it is from the dungeon. The dungeon refreshes every week, and there's a chance to get the key from the treasure chests. The door crystal can only be obtained from the high-level treasure chests guarded by the bosses. Only then did the students nod their heads, as if they understood something. The Shang Malian Academy's dungeon was very special in this world. In the dungeons outside, there was no such weekly refresh mechanism, and there was no such thing as treasure chests. There were only treasure chests that were used to collecting all kinds of items. The people in this world might not feel anything. However, when Dake first learned about the dungeon, he felt that it was very similar to the dungeon in the game. The Shang Malian Academy's dungeon refreshed from Monday to Wednesday. Some rare bosses needed a longer time to refresh. Therefore, the students were only allowed to enter the dungeon from Friday to Sunday. Okay. Professor Nini clapped her hands and said, for us the door key and the door crystal are not important. Our mission today is to each hunt at least one magic beast and use their dropped items as proof. The range of activity is limited to the first to second levels. It's best if you travel with me. Those who want to move freely can apply to me after we reach the entrance to the second level. However, the condition is that you have to be in a group of 3 and have to bring the magic needle. Hearing this, the students were in an uproar. Someone couldn't help but ask, Professor, do we have to hunt magic beasts? I thought we were just sightseeing in the dungeon. Professor Nini turned her head and didn't look at him. Hey. However, even more students became excited. What's the point of sightseeing? We're here to hunt. Our goal is to slay the dragon. Let's go. People like White and Doran secretly clenched their fists. Luoboat glanced at White and hesitated. White, do you have that magic needle? White's clenched fists loosened. She hesitated and said, I don't. What about you? Luoboat. How could I have, White? That's true. Then we have to follow Professor Nini, right? Luoboat. Let's find someone to borrow one. The requirement is for a group of 3. Aren't we still short one person? Let's find someone with a magic needle. White nodded and said, that makes sense. Luoboat leaned over and pointed in Dake's direction. He whispered, how about we find Dimung? He has a magic needle, and he gives us a sense of security. With him, we can even challenge a boss. White turned to look at Dake. After a moment of silence, she said, forget it. Let's find someone else. There will always be people who want to move freely, but can't find a companion. Okay, Luoboat said regretfully. You have the final say. The two of them started to observe in the crowd. The undercurrent in the crowd was surging. Many people had already begun to form teams secretly. It was indeed a difficult problem to form a group of 3 with a magic needle. Not everyone wanted to go on an adventure, which led to a shortage of people in some small groups. The number of people with a magic needle was limited. At most, they could form a group of 10 or so. Only a quarter of the people could apply. 2 in 1 4/100 plus. Chapter 338. Professor Nini's arrangement actually disrupted Dake's pace. In fact, he originally planned to find an opportunity to act alone and see if he could find something with the greedy slime eye. It was also commonly known as trying his luck. Unfortunately, the rule of 3 people in a group restricted his hands and feet. In desperation, he turned his gaze to Deanna and Luo Si beside him. Deanna saw him looking over and only raised her head in confusion. Then she took out a milk candy from her pocket and handed it over. Here. Dake was stunned for a moment before he took the milk candy from her palm, peeled off the candy wrapper, and put it into his mouth. Not to mention, it was really sweet. Since it was already like this, Dake didn't dwell on it anymore. Now that he had some free time, he observed the groups of the different academies with great interest. 1 second to remember https://m. VIP can't you? VIP first was the aristocrat house. Teddy Dolan was the most popular boy among the first-year students of the aristocrat house other than Dake. He also had a very strong competitive spirit, and naturally sought to form a team. Although Professor Nini didn't set any requirements for the strength of the monsters they hunted, there was competition when there was a goal. Whether it was between branches or within branches, they had already begun to secretly compete with each other. In addition to the little fatty Pittan, Dolan's group also invited a girl with a magic needle. They formed a 3-person group. When Dake looked over, he happened to meet Dolan's gaze and nodded slightly. Dolan didn't know what he misunderstood, but he suddenly raised his fist and clenched it hard, exuding a strong fighting spirit. And on the other side, the Night House never lost to anyone when it came to competitive spirit. In addition to White and Luo both seeking to form a team, the always eye-catching sunny young man, Justin Wayne, also sought to form a team. However, Justin Wayne himself carried a magic needle, so he was more relaxed in the selection of members and quickly picked the 2 best in his small group. But our Miss Know-It-All, Aima Métis, was in trouble. Her 2 deskmates, Susan and Lucy, weren't very good students, and the 2 of them weren't willing to leave Professor Nini's protection and take risks. The Academy of Knights was known for its bravery and integrity, but courage and integrity have always taken many forms. Some people looked brave on the surface, but at the critical moment, they ran faster than anyone else. Some people are usually timid, but when it's time to be brave, they never back down. Aima had always believed that her 2 good friends were also brave girls. If she forced them, they would definitely have the courage to accompany her. However, she was no longer an immature person who would do such a thing. Socializing with others would allow one to grow. She knew that she should consider finding someone else to team up with. The most ideal partner. Her gaze inadvertently swept across the crowd in the aristocratic courtyard, and then she sighed. She hadn't been able to find a place for herself in that team. In that case, he would settle for the next best thing. Emma looked at the crowd from the Magic Device Institute again. Saraswati, the head of the Sorcerer's Institute, was talking quietly with Heidi Euphemia, one of her staunch supporters. Heidi was a girl with black hair and bright eyes. She always tied her hair into 2 thick braids that reached her chest. As one of the students of the Sorcerer's Institute, although she wasn't as good as Sarah, she was still quite good. Now both of them were holding magic needle in their hands and seemed to be looking for a 3rd person to team up with. If it's them. Aima couldn't help but be a little tempted. Although they weren't from the same institute, those 2 were undoubtedly the most suitable choices. However, she bit her lips and finally looked away. Teaming up with Sarah wasn't within her consideration. Professor Nini didn't give the students too much time to stay. After she made sure that her intentions were conveyed clearly, she gathered everyone and set off for the 2nd floor of the dungeon. The students who entered the dungeon for the first time suppressed their inner excitement. Under the reminder of each other, they held the sorcerer's card in their hands and kept it ready to be summoned at any time. They followed Professor Nini's footsteps closely. Dake Dimming spontaneously walked at the back. On his head was Little Devil, who was holding a lunchbox. On his left was the Dilu Beast, who was carrying a backpack. In front of him were Deanna and Luo C. It was also his first time entering the dungeon. Perhaps it was because he had played a lot of RPGs in his previous life, but he was very familiar with this type of dungeon. The Shung Malian dungeon was very special. However, that special characteristic increased from the top to the bottom. It was said that the structure of the dungeon was similar to a steeple. The lower one went, the more open and complicated the terrain was. At the deeper level, it was like a small world with an independent ecological structure. At the top level, it was a very ordinary maze-like dungeon. The connected walls cut the entire floor into countless sections. The adventurers walked through the passages between the walls and went deeper and deeper. In a sense, it was somewhat similar to the secret passage in the castle. Thinking of this, Dake couldn't help but recall the encounter with the Minotaur in the secret passage. The appearance of the Minotaur in the secret passage was a sudden occurrence. However, in the dungeon, it was a normal occurrence. Of course, in theory, the first level of the dungeon would not give birth to monsters of that level. Even the bosses on this floor were only 5 or 6 stars in strength. This meant that it was relatively safe. Of course, there were no automatic magic lights in the dungeon. Instead, there was a special type of moss. The glowing moss could be seen everywhere, covering every corner of the dungeon, especially on the ceiling. Professor Nini once mentioned in class that this type of glowing moss belonged to the type of plants that only appeared at night. They hunted corpses and other rotten things at night. During the day, they would be silent and release light during the digestion process. Most of the glowing moss was white, but there were also green, red and other colors. Under the illumination of the glowing moss, the dungeon presented a strange scene. The first level of the dungeon was not without other plants besides the glowing moss. In the corners and crevices of the walls, there were all kinds of special plants that could not be seen from the outside. If one looked carefully, they would find many flowers and plants that could be used to make potions. When Professor Nini led the team, she did not walk all the way. She would occasionally stop at places with lush plants to rest. At that time, Dake would take out his picture book and draw the ecology of the plants in the corner of the wall. There were many students who did this, but most of them were in the Magic Engineering Institute. Personally observing and recording the growth of the plants in the dungeon would always yield some results. In the blink of an eye, half an hour had passed. Under Professor Nini's lead, the students shuttled through the maze of the dungeon. From the initial excitement and curiosity to the gradual accumulation of fatigue and boredom, the change in mood was obvious. The reason was, along the way, they had not encountered a single demonic creature. For those students who were not interested in plants, all they could see was walls, walls, walls and walls. Boring. Tasteless. The vigilance of the first time coming into contact with an unfamiliar environment became lower and lower as time passed. When the monster finally appeared, most of the students screamed in panic. But what they did not know was that the monster that was born from the wall was even more afraid than them. Dake excitedly observed the monster that only had half of its body drilled out of the wall. He thought that if it had a clear mind, it would want to drill back in immediately. Professor Nini, who had the blood of a beast king flowing in her veins, was like a terrifying mountain. In the brain of this poor monster, there was an emotion called fear constantly accumulating. Good luck. In the midst of the students' panic and screams, Professor Nini's eyes lit up. She quickly took 2 steps and leaped in front of the monster. Then, she stretched out her huge hand that was covered with gray hair and grabbed the back of the monster's neck, forcibly pulling it out of the wall. It was as if they were dealing with the experimental monsters that were used as teaching examples in the classroom. The students quickly calmed down and covered their mouths, pretending that they had never screamed. Does anyone know what kind of monster this is? Professor Nini turned around and shook the monster with an innocent face. She did not forget to teach at this moment. The monster was covered in green skin, and on its back were dense lumps that looked like a toad's. Mucus was constantly flowing out of the lumps. White swallowed his saliva and raised his hand. Professor, is that a hypertoxic lizard? Professor Nini immediately said happily, yes, it is a hypertoxic lizard. Wah! Screams suddenly sounded one after another. The students quickly took a few steps back and distanced themselves from Professor Nini and the hypertoxic lizard in her hand. Dake, what's wrong with the hypertoxic lizard? Why are they so scared? Deanna turned around and asked curiously. Dake whispered, do you see the lumps on its back? Those are the hypertoxic lizard's poison glands. The venom that flows out from the glands will evaporate in the air and gradually form a poisonous fog. Although it's not fatal, it will make people dizzy, nauseous, and want to vomit. Deanna thought for a long time and blurted out, but it's sweet. Dake, huh? Deanna said shyly. I mean, I was a kid when I was young. I touched a little when I was young. The venom that flowed out from those lumps was like syrup sweet. Dake's pupils slightly widened, and he could not help but stare at her for a long time. Crack. Professor Nini pinched her fingers and broke the hypertoxic lizard's neck. The hypertoxic lizard that was screaming desperately just now suddenly stopped breathing. Its body did not disappear into thin air, but it was obvious that most of its body was turning lighter at a speed visible to the naked eye. Finally, one of its teeth grew slightly longer and emitted a dark green glow. Professor Nini explained, I should have said this before. Our Shangmalian underground city is very special. After a demon dies, the remaining power in its body will gather in a certain part of its body and become a high-quality material. For example, this hypertoxic lizard's value is all condensed in this poisonous tooth. Professor Nini pulled out the small poisonous tooth with some difficulty, then looked around and threw the hypertoxic lizard's body in her hands. The corpse drew an arc in the air and finally stuck to a wall that was covered with vines. In the blink of an eye, the vines that looked no different from ordinary vines suddenly wriggled and wrapped around the hypertoxic lizard's body like snakes. The tip of the vines and the vines cracked open, and the cracks were full of fine teeth. The vines quickly ate up the hypertoxic lizard's body until there was nothing left. This scene immediately made the little magisters keep quiet out of fear. Compared to the hypertoxic lizard, the seemingly harmless vine monster that was hanging on the wall was obviously more terrifying. Those vines are vine monsters. Dake's pupils shrank, and he couldn't help but be cautious. In his homework for magical beasts, he had written a small paper on the topic of vine monsters. But he still couldn't identify them. Not to mention the other students. If it wasn't for Professor Nini's demonstration, who knew how many people would have suffered because of this? Every time a dungeon escape device was activated, it would cost a considerable sum of money. Professor Nini seemed to remember that he had written a small paper, so she pointed him out from the crowd and asked him to help her with the science. Dake didn't hide anything and told her about his research. At this time, the students finally didn't feel bored from walking for a long time. They walked in the maze of the underground city and listened to their classmates' detailed explanations. Finally, they felt like they were visiting a museum. Vine monsters were indeed an extremely dangerous species. They could be found in almost all levels of the underground city, and were very dangerous and difficult to identify. Adventurers always confused them with vines, and if they weren't careful, they would be killed. But if one could identify the difference between vine monsters and vine monsters, they would be a very useful magical beast. They were very aggressive, but their attack strength wasn't high, and their weakness was that they couldn't move after taking root. The vine monster's brain was located at the root, so as long as the connection between the vine and the root was cut off, it would lose its connection to the brain and stop moving. At this time, the tip of the vine monster's head was cut off, and the skin was cut open. The blood that flowed in it was drained and washed. Then, one could obtain a piece of edible meat. The vine monster's meat was soft and delicate, and when placed in boiling water, it could be eaten in a few minutes. It was one of the rare edible species in the underground city, and it was easy to process, and it was meat. In addition, the venom of the hypertoxic lizard had to be treated with foo poison before it could be eaten as syrup, which was very troublesome. It wasn't as convenient as the vine monster. The underground city was like this. It seemed dangerous, but if one looked carefully, they could find a lot of fun. It took about an hour. Under Professor Nini's guidance, the students found the stairs to the second level very smoothly. 2-in-1-4/100+. Chapter 339. The entrance from the first floor of the underground city to the second floor appeared at the end of an ordinary passage. There was no door to stop the monsters, nor was there a boss guarding the entrance. The entrance of the stairs was even a little short, so Professor Nini had to bend down slightly to enter. However, just like how the walls of the underground city could be broken, the stairs to the next floor should also be able to be opened. The group of people entered the stairs one by one. After 5 minutes of walking, they finally arrived at the entrance to the second floor. This area was similar to a circular hall. In the middle of the hall, there was a toad fountain that was spewing green liquid towards the sky. It seemed to be the magic symbol of the second floor. After Professor Nini walked out of the stairs, she sniffed the air with her nose. After a while she announced, "Let's disperse. It's time for lunch." Yay! The students who had been waiting for this moment suddenly shouted excitedly. After that, men and women formed groups of 3 to 5 and quickly spread out in the hall. After more than an hour of walking, whether it was their legs or their stomachs, they were already complaining. Website. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP at this time, they sat down, chatted, and had a meal. Of course, it was very beautiful. Dake took out the magic needle and recorded the magic next to the toad fountain. Then he returned to Deanna and Luosi. The three of them sat in a circle and began to eat as if they were camping. Hey, Deanna put down the big bag on her back and shook out a lot of snacks. Luosi quickly went forward and put the bag back up. Then, she put away the snacks with an annoyed face. Dake waved at the little devil beast. The latter flew down and put the multi-layered lunchbox on the ground. On the other side, the Dilu beast had already sat down obediently beside Dark. It was extremely obedient. What did you guys bring? Dake asked casually. Luosi took out a square box from the snacks and whispered, I made sandwiches with bread, sausages, jam, and other things. As she spoke, she lifted the lid, and the sweet smell of jam wafted out. In the box, there were not only sandwiches but also cute cakes. These cakes were all fixed in the box, so they didn't break from shaking. Dake clicked his tongue in praise before he opened his lunchbox and took out his food. The exquisite dishes and rich aroma instantly attracted everyone's attention. Deanna couldn't help but cover her mouth and say, Awesome. Dake smiled. If you go to the cafeteria, you can get these too. Cafeteria? Luosi whispered. Did you ask for it from the halfling chefs? Dake shrugged. That's right. Then he took out the 3 sets of tableware from the lunchbox. There was nothing else, just 3 small plates, 3 forks, and 3 small spoons. He divided the tableware into 3 portions, and gave 1 each to Deanna, and 1 to Luosi. Then, she took out 3 pairs of light disposable gloves from her bag, and handed them over. Diana raised her dirty paws and took a look at them. She pouted and took the gloves. Of course, she still used water to wash them to a certain extent. The 3 of them then shared their food and drinks and ate happily. The little demon beast stood on the side for a long time. Suddenly, it remembered something, so it went to Dake's side and opened its mouth. Dake was a little surprised. After a long while, he smiled bitterly and turned the fork away from its mouth. Then he used the spiced duck meat on the fork to block the little demon beast's mouth. Munch munch. The little demon beast immediately chewed happily. The Dilu beast next to it couldn't help but open its eyes wide. The same sound was heard again. The Diru beast turned its head with an abnormally sensitive expression. It actually saw that the shameless girl named Diana had actually learned from the thick-skinned little devil beast, and opened her mouth. Dake couldn't help but stare blankly again. Luosi covered her mouth and chuckled. Dake had no choice but to pick a big piece of meat from the lunchbox. He used a fork to pick it up, dipped it in sweet sauce, leaned over and stuffed the meat into her mouth. Wow! Deanna took a big bite of the meat and proudly looked at the confused little demon beast. Little demon beast. You human. Why are you fighting with us familiars? The atmosphere of the picnic gradually increased. But not everyone was as happy as Dake and the other 2. White and Luoboat were still worried. They chewed on the dry biscuits and looked at the other students from time to time. Their target was the students who had the magic needle. But except for a few boys, the ones who had the magic needle were the more careful girls. It was actually quite difficult for the 2 boys to find a girl to team up with, even if one of them was the brave warrior. But the girls already had their own circle. After several failed attempts to take the initiative, White and Luoboat's eyes finally focused on AI Ma. As more and more students formed teams, AI Ma seemed to be the only choice. White couldn't help but ask, Luoboat, what do you think of AI Ma? Luoboat couldn't help but roll his eyes. If she was an AI Ma, she would be a good choice. White. Then should we go find her? Luoboat was shocked. No. Hey White, did you understand what I said? I said if it wasn't AI Ma. White. It can only be AI Ma. Then he walked straight to AI Ma. There was no one more suitable than AI Ma who had the magic needle and didn't have a team. AI Ma Métis had basically given up the idea of free activities at this moment. She didn't want to force her 2 desk mates, nor did she want to find 2 random people to team up with. So she thought she might as well give up. She could also gain something by following Professor Nini. Even so. But when White took the initiative to find her, she was still tempted. Next to the toad fountain, Professor Nini sat alone on the edge of the fountain. A huge claw reached into the water and scratched aimlessly. She did bring lunch, but she finished it in 2 bites. The food was too small and couldn't even fill the gaps between her teeth. She was hungry again after sitting for a while. If she didn't bring her students, she would have gone out to look for food. But as a professor, she had to stay here to protect her students. Slurp. Professor Nini quickly looked away from Dake's lunchbox and sucked back the saliva that almost dripped down. If she didn't have the restraint of a professor, she would have pounced on him. It's so hard. Finally, it was about 1 o'clock. Professor Nini saw that most of the students had finished their lunch, so she quickly clapped her hands and said, "Students who want to move freely can come to me and apply. The limit is the 1st and 2nd floor, but try not to be too far away from me, and you have to come back here before dark." The students who had been waiting for a long time suddenly became excited. Saraswati, Heidi Euphemia, and another girl from the School of Magic came to Professor Nini first. After the 3 of them showed the magic needle, they immediately completed the registration procedures and got permission. After that, more and more people walked out one after another. The rest of the students whispered, most of them guessing what kind of results these groups could achieve. "It's time to go." Dake knocked on Deanna, who was still addicted to the snacks, and began to clean up the garbage. Deanna raised her head and looked at the unfinished snacks with some regret. But she still patted her cheeks and broke free from them. Dake couldn't help but smile. Then he placed the garbage into a bag and looked in the direction of Professor Nini. White and Luo Boat walked out of the crowd. Behind them was the expressionless AI Ma, who was 2 meters away. They formed a team? Dake was slightly surprised, but he didn't care too much. From his standpoint, he was worried that the 3 of them would have a conflict. But with the dungeon escape device, nothing would happen. After White's group finished their registration, Dake brought Deanna and Luosi over. Professor Nini glanced at the bag on Diana's back and said, "Does your magic needle have a good record of magic power?" Dake smiled and said, "Of course." Professor Nini passed the cardboard over and said, "Register it." The 3 of them finished their registration and set off. "Which floor are we going to?" Luosi asked after they walked for a while. Dake thought for a while and said, "The 1st floor is safer, but I want to go to the 2nd floor. What do you think?" Deanna raised her hand and said, "I don't mind." "If you don't mind, then why did you raise your hand so high?" Luosi pressed her hand down again and said, "Then let's go to the 2nd floor. Later, I'll summon my familiar. It can explore the way." Deanna said, "Then I'll also," Luosi said, "Okay." Then, the 2 of them summoned their familiars. Deanna's familiar was a panda the size of a basketball. It had a round head and short legs. Because it had just been summoned, it wasn't forced to wear a skirt. On the other hand, Rose's familiar was a snow-white rabbit. If one didn't pay attention, they would think that it was no different from an ordinary rabbit. But in fact, there was a small bump on its forehead that was covered by long hair. It was a young unicorn rabbit. But for a familiar, race and attributes weren't important. Body size, strength, and speed were more important. After all, familiars weren't aggressive. Their main function was to deliver letters. Now that they were used to explore the way, it was fine. On the other hand, the little fiendish magical beast couldn't help but smile when it saw the 2 silly demonic familiars. Every time he saw other people's familiars, he would feel a sense of pride. Since the food in the lunchbox had already been emptied, Dark placed it in layers into his backpack. Therefore, the little demonic beast was completely unburdened at this moment. Dake said, "Little devil, don't forget your job." "Little devil beast, isn't my job a delivery man?" Dake looked at it lightly. "Little devil, yes sir. I'm the vanguard." As the 3 familiars went to explore the way, the environment in the passage gradually quieted down. Dake stopped talking nonsense. Deanna and Luosi also became cautious. When they went from the 1st floor to the 2nd floor, they didn't encounter any monsters. But everyone knew that it was because Professor Nini was leading the team. Now that Professor Nini didn't have her aura of intimidation, the danger level of the dungeon instantly increased by several levels. Monsters were no longer pitiful creatures that avoided humans. Instead, They would instantly transform into monsters with fangs and sharp claws when they encountered humans. It took less than 5 minutes to reach the dungeon. Suddenly, the demonic spirits who were scouting ahead began to move. The three of them had an idea and looked at each other. Dake immediately sped up. The Diru beast followed behind. Deanna suppressed her impulse and carefully walked forward with Luosi. After a while, Dake arrived at the scene of the incident. He couldn't help but smile. He saw a monster that looked like a vicious dog being humiliated by the three familiars. It was a monster that was known for its ferocity, but it was no match for the three non-aggressive familiars. Luosi's unicorn rabbit looked gentle and tame. It actually bit the monster's front paw tightly. It was unknown how Diana's red panda did it, but it managed to strangle the monster's neck. The whole bear hung around the monster's neck like a pendant, completely restraining it. The monster that had one of its front paws and head sealed could only attack with its other front paw. However, Little Devil used its advantage in the air. Every time it pounced on the monster, it wouldn't be greedy. It almost scratched the monster's scalp. Is this a normal monster on the second floor? Dark put away the magic card in his sleeve and took out Pride from the card pack to summon normally. As the dark golden ball of light entered between its eyebrows, Little Devil's eyes instantly changed. It suddenly opened its wings and roared angrily. Then a shark head syringe condensed in front of its wings and shot at the monster. Poof! The needle of small dart accurately pierced into the monster's head. Then, the thick needle was quickly filled with blood. The monster wailed and no longer had the strength to struggle. When Deanna and Luosi arrived, Dake had already started to collect the monster's material. The moment it died, all the magic in its body gathered on one of its canine teeth, emitting a faint white light. But from the fact that it could be killed by the Little Devil beast, this canine tooth couldn't be considered as a valuable item. What kind of monster is this? Deanna trotted over and asked. It should be a small magic dog. Dake responded. When he was about to get up, the Dilu beast beside him suddenly pulled his sleeve and pointed to the front. He couldn't help but look up. After reaching the end of the passage, there was a fork in the road. But there was nothing at this time. However, when he focused, he could vaguely hear some sounds. There is a large group of monsters approaching. Deanna's voice suddenly sounded behind him. Her tone was mixed with a hint of panic, but more than that, she was excited. 2 and 140-100 plus. It's the end of the month. Vote for the free monthly ticket. It's about to expire. Today's target is 12,000. Chapter 340. Deanna, summon your magic guide elf. Luosi, protect yourself. Dake stood up slightly and said quickly. His voice was unusually calm, causing the panic in Deanna's heart to disappear in the blink of an eye. What was left was only excitement. She reached out her hand and took out a magic guide card from her card bag, and immediately summoned it. Luosi stepped back slightly. Although there was a look of fear on her face, the way she drew the card was still quite stable. It was very normal to encounter a group of monsters in the underground city. The main thing was that those who had thought about it before would generally be mentally prepared. As for whether or not they would panic when they really encountered it, that was a matter of their mental fortitude. Dake did not summon immediately, but took the time to look at Deanna and Luosi. The magic guide elf that Deanna summoned was indeed her favorite 3-star magic guide elf. Spirit Bear. Remember the website. Mvipkanshu. Via an undying species, the spirit bear had the ability to be immune to physical damage, and was very effective against monsters that relied on their claws and teeth to attack. It was indeed a very good choice. However, what Luosi summoned was a magic guide elf that Dake had never seen before, and it was not the rabbit-type elf that she liked. Dake had always thought that she was hiding a rabbit's nest. However, what she summoned in the end was a pitch-black sphere. There seemed to be a divine light flowing around the sphere, and there was not a trace of anything else on its body. It was impossible to tell whether it was a magic guide elf or not. Luosi seemed to have seen his doubts and quickly said, "It's a Mobius worm, 3-star, insect type, super type." A Mobius worm? Dake could not help but mutter. Although I'm not too sure, but from the name, it should be a defense type magic guide elf, right? Based on his trust in Luosi, Dake was temporarily relieved, and then carefully stared at the end of the tunnel. Only a moment later, the sound that needed to be heard before suddenly became loud. At this time, they could clearly hear that it was the sound of a group of demons running. Dake and the others finally got a good look at the first demonic creature as it rushed out from the right fork. Sure enough, it was the companion of the little magical dog that even the three familiars couldn't defeat. Looks like it has a skill similar to Summon Companion. Dake immediately understood. Then he patted the head of the Dilu beast beside him, stopping its impulse to charge forward. Deanna. After a soft call, Deanna immediately understood. She said excitedly, "Spirit bear, go." Roar. The aged giant bear of light let out a thunderous roar that reverberated in the tunnel. However, the power it released was not enough to repel the ferocious demonic dog. After the first little demon dog rushed out, the second, the third. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 little demon dogs rushed out. The spirit bear, on the other hand, rushed forward under Deanna's command. The giant bear was 3 meters tall even when it was on all fours, in front of the little demon dogs that were less than 1 meter tall. It was like a fully armed chariot, directly crushing them. Deanna's excited eyebrows hid a trace of nervousness, until the spirit bear unstoppably knocked the 2 little demon dogs in the front row away. She suddenly clenched her small fists. Bang! Bang! The 2 little demon dogs slammed into the wall, their bones almost shattered. They slid down and could not get up again. However, the rest of the little demon dogs were still ferociously rushing forward. They suddenly split into 2 streams, trying to avoid the front. The spirit bear suddenly stopped, using one of its paws as support, and the other paw slammed down hard. The bear paw that was as big as a millstone slapped another little demon dog. That little demon dog spat out blood in the air, and struggled after falling to the ground. However, after losing 3 little demon dogs, the rest of the little demon dogs successfully approached the side of the spirit bear. Then they jumped up and bit the spirit bear's body fiercely. In the blink of an eye, there were already a few little demon dogs hanging on the spirit bear's huge body, biting and scratching at the spirit bear with their sharp claws. The spirit bear was in pain, and could not help but roar. However, Deanna's magical power flowed from her fingers into the magic card. She was constantly monitoring the status of the spirit bear, and she realized that its magical power did not decrease at all. Those little demon dogs looked ferocious, but in fact, they could not break through its defense at all. However, Deanna did not let her guard down. Professor Nini had taught her about the things to take note of in a battle in the underground city. For the adventurers who had just entered the underground city, the most important thing was not the strength of the magic fairy, because their magic fairy was usually enough to deal with demons like the little demon dogs. What they needed was the courage and experience when facing demons, and most importantly, the allocation of magical power. When an enchanter was full of magical power, they usually had a strong combat power that was superior to other combat professions. However, they also had a weakness similar to mages, which was the lack of magical power. Especially after summoning the magic fairy, if they were not careful and got into a long battle, the huge amount of magical power needed to sustain the magic fairy for a long time would quickly wear down the enchanter. Therefore, the key point of the allocation of magical power was the control and selection of the number of summoned magic fairies. In other words, it was better not to summon as much as possible. If it was possible to only summon one, it was better to only summon one. Using the most accurate judgment to determine the strength of the demons, then sending out the corresponding magic fairy, and striving to finish the battle within 3 minutes, was the mentality that an enchanter must have. Therefore, under the current situation, it was not enough for the spirit bear to be in an invincible position. It needed to finish off its opponent faster. Deanna observed carefully for a while and suddenly shouted, "Spirit bear, roll." Roll was of course not a killing move. It was a simple command similar to expose your belly and extend your claws. Roar. The spirit bear responded with an angry roar. Then it lay down on the ground and rolled to the side. Its body was like a small mountain, and in a split second, it pressed the little magic dog that was hanging on the side under its body. A whoa! The little magic dog's scream and the sound of its bones being crushed were instantly heard. After the spirit bear rolled one more time, the little magic dog that was hanging on the other side of its body was also crushed and seriously injured. Only 3 or 4 little magic dogs were spared, but they were no longer able to slow down the spirit bear's footsteps. Seeing that victory was in sight, one of the little demonic dogs seemed to have finally been enlightened. Its scarlet eyes turned to look at the 3 humans who seemed to have no strength to truss up a chicken. Then it bared its teeth, lowered its body, and exerted force on its 4 limbs. It actually abandoned the spirit bear and rushed towards the 3 humans. Dilu Beast. Dake let go of the hand that was pressing on the Dilu Beast's head. But before the Dilu Beast lifted its leg, Deanna, who was beside him, suddenly said excitedly, "Let me do it." Then the little girl, who was only 12 years old, strode forward fearlessly. Her eyes were shining with a cold light. She slightly retreated her right shoulder and seized the opportunity when the little magic dog leaped into the air. Her right arm struck out like lightning. The fist that was wrapped in tender skin was extremely ferocious, and it hammered the little magic dog's jaw from the front. Awah! After a mournful scream, the little magic dog's jaw hit its upper jaw hard, and its teeth were almost broken. Deanna finally couldn't help but reveal her natural strength since she entered the school. That little magic dog was actually almost killed by her punch. Hey! She stopped in her tracks and stood up straight. Dake's eyelids twitched as he watched from the side. Deanna. Luosi quickly ran over, lifted her fist and hurriedly checked it. It's okay. Deanna didn't care about the bloodstains on her fist. Of course, it was the little magic dog's blood. Luosi let out a sigh of relief, but at the same time complained, "Don't do this kind of thing in the future. A girl's skin is very precious." Deanna patted her chest with her other hand and said proudly, "I have a special medicine at home that can remove scars. I guarantee that there will be no pain and no scars." Luosi wanted to say something, but the words were stuck in his throat. Then the spirit bear killed the other 2 little magic dogs on the spot. Deanna wanted to put it back into the magic card, but Dake didn't miss the opportunity to remind her, when hunting magic beasts in the underground city, you must make sure that the magic beasts are completely dead. Otherwise, when we are collecting materials, we will easily be ambushed. Although Deanna wasn't very afraid of ambushes, she still quickly gave the order. The spirit bear waved its claws and killed all the little demonic dogs one by one. "Next, we will collect materials." Deanna nodded and recalled the spirit bear. Then, she went to collect materials with Luosi. The corpses of the little magic dogs were too horrible to look at. Deanna completely ignored it, but Luosi felt nauseous when the smell of blood rushed to her head. However, she still insisted on collecting materials from the corpses of the little magic dogs. After the little magic dog died, most of its magic power condensed into one of its canine teeth. However, there was still a small amount of magic power condensed into its claws and other parts. Dissecting the body parts from the corpse was actually a challenging task. Dake had the experience of killing chickens and fishes, so he wasn't bad in this aspect. Deanna didn't feel any discomfort at all. Luosi. The moment she cut a part of the little magic dog, she couldn't help but vomit it out. Deanna was shocked and quickly went to comfort her. Dake shook his head helplessly. He put on his gloves and prepared to separate the rest of the materials. However, after Luosi finished vomiting, she insisted, "Let me do it." Dark paused for a moment before revealing a smile. People can be weak, but they can't not be strong. After collecting, they put all the materials into a bag and put it into Deanna's backpack. The backpack that was originally full was quite empty after lunchtime. It was just the right place to put the materials. Then they found a place to sit down and rest for a while. After Luosi gradually recovered, they continued on their journey. After having the experience of dealing with the little magic dogs, Deanna and Luosi were undoubtedly much more confident. The 3 of them gradually left the entrance and went deeper into the forest. During this period of time, they naturally encountered more demonic creatures. Dake didn't do anything from the beginning to the end. Basically, Deanna was the one who dealt with the monsters, and Luosi was responsible for collecting. After a whole hour, the 3 of them gradually became more and more familiar with each other. Since there was rest after every hunt, They didn't feel tired. Seeing that the two girls were gradually getting used to the rhythm of the underground city, Dake stopped at a spacious open space and summoned the trash slime. Deanna came over and poked the trash slime in Dake's arms. She asked curiously, "Are we going to start looking for treasure chests?" Dake nodded. "It's not easy to come to the underground city. If we don't even find a single treasure chest, it will feel like a wasted trip." "That's true." Deanna nodded hard, strongly agreeing with him. In the Shungmalian underground city, there were some real treasure chests hidden, not some treasure chests that lived by picking up trash. If one was lucky enough, one could even open some long-lost treasures from the treasure chests. From the beginning, Dake had his eyes on the treasure chests. He had been holding back for a long time. "There shouldn't be any danger, right?" Luosi was worried. "Isn't it written in novels that treasure chests always coexist with danger? Good treasure chests will even be guarded by powerful monsters." Dake smiled. "But this is the underground city. What are we here for?" Deanna immediately shouted, "Sightseeing, traveling, and having a picnic." When Dake and Luosi both looked at her, she stuck out her tongue and said, "It's an adventure." Dake said helplessly, "That's true. But I hope you can remember another sentence." Deanna asked, "What sentence?" Dake said seriously, "Adventurers don't take risks." Deanna said, "But you just said that we came to the underground city for adventure." Dake said, "That's why ideals and reality always clash." Deanna couldn't help but hold her head and shook it hard. "My head hurts, I don't understand." Luosi stuffed a milk candy into her mouth. Deanna chewed the milk candy and said in realization, "I understand. Just like how I want to eat candy, but I might not be able to eat it." After a while Dake said, "You're right." In Deanna's proud laughter, Dake took out Greed 2 from his card pack and reminded them, "Get ready." Next, it was time to witness a miracle. In the name of Dake Dimung, magical summoning. As the normal summoning spell was completed, Greed 2 instantly released a pale blue light. The blue light gradually became thicker and wrapped the garbage slime in it. In an instant, the garbage slime expanded and changed shape in the light. It changed from the original green slime to a blue-green jelly. Ouch, 2-star magical elf. Greedy slime, my ultimate skill. Treasure sense. We only have 15 minutes. Dake said quickly and lifted up the greedy slime eye. The jelly-like body swayed slightly on its palm, and its eyes gradually sharpened. Ouch! The short tentacles that squeezed out of its body suddenly pointed in a direction. The corners of Dark's mouth curled up as he immediately said, "Little devil, scout the way." 2 in 1 4000 plus 4 6. Chapter 341. The trash slime that had evolved into greedy slime once again had an excited soul hidden under its calm appearance. Its innate greed gave it an extraordinary sense of smell for treasures. In its sense of smell for treasures, this underground city was simply an inexhaustible treasure trove. And the smell of treasures was everywhere. But its excitement were not simply because it had entered this treasure trove. The more important reason was that it finally found its use. In this underground city, no one could replace it. Meow? A faint meow suddenly sounded in the greedy slime's head. It quickly shook its head to get rid of its distracting thoughts. Dake looked at the greedy slime that suddenly shook violently with some confusion. But the greedy slime quickly calmed down and continued to use its tentacles to point the way. The little devil beast flew in front under Dake's command. Remember in 1 second. https://m. Vipcanchu. VIP Deanna and Luosi each held a magic card and maintained the necessary caution as they followed closely behind. Dake tried to control its speed and did not run too fast. On the one hand, overly hasty movements could cause accidents, such as accidentally falling into a trap. On the other hand, Luosi's physical fitness could not keep up for the time being. Although the greedy slime's evolution only lasted for 15 minutes, 15 minutes was actually not as short as one would think. Moreover, the greedy slime's sense of smell was obviously limited by distance. The further the distance, the blurrier the perception. On the contrary, the closer the distance, the clearer the perception. So when it pointed the way so clearly, it meant that the location of the treasure would not be too far away. Then, as expected, in less than 10 minutes, the three of them arrived at the location of the treasure. Stop. Dake suddenly stopped. The little devil beast flew back from the front and blocked the three of them. Dake immediately asked, "What's the matter?" The little devil beast landed on the ground, crossed its two wings in front of its body, and shook its head violently. Dake suddenly said, "The road ahead is not passable?" The little devil beast immediately nodded. Dake, "Understood, let's check again and report." The little devil beast. Dake sternly said, "Be vigilant and continue forward." Deanna and Luosi immediately slowed down. The three of them continued forward. Only half a minute later, Dake just turned a corner and was shocked to find that there was no path ahead. In the second level of the underground city that was structured like a maze, there was actually a bottomless abyss. The path that went all the way forward stopped at the edge of the abyss, only 3 to 4 meters. Looking forward, across the abyss, they could see a small platform. On the platform, there was a treasure chest that was as red as fire sitting quietly on the platform. Puff! The greedy slime exerted its strength and jumped up from Dark's palm. Obviously, the treasure it had smelled was the treasure chest that was separated by an entire abyss. Well, Dake was the slime Dake slime Dake slime. It immediately quieted down, and its jelly-like body became even softer. It was obviously overjoyed. Dake smiled, took out the magic card and put it away. "Come back first." The greedy slime obediently went back into the magic card. Then, Dake looked at the treasure chest again, and his eyes gradually became serious. The location of the treasure chest was actually not tricky. As long as one had a flying magic fairy, it was easy to fly across the abyss and bring the treasure chest back. Even if the treasure chest was the type that couldn't be moved, one could still control the magic fairy to open it and take the treasure back. But thinking about it rationally, the underground city wouldn't let you get the treasure chest so easily. Generally speaking, there are two possibilities, Dake said. One possibility is that there are demons in the abyss. The other possibility is that the treasure chest is a trap. What do you two think? Deanna and Luosi were also carefully observing. After Dake asked, Deanna's little face gradually wrinkled into a bitter gourd. Luosi, after thinking seriously, said, "No matter which possibility it is, we can try it first. We are magisters, aren't we?" Dake couldn't help but smile. "Indeed, we are magisters." Magisters had an endless supply of magic fairy cards. Magisters could almost do things that regular fighters couldn't. Dake reached out and took out a magic card from his card bag. He then said, "Back off." It wasn't safe to be close to the abyss. If there really were demons hiding in the abyss, it must be something huge. It was very likely that it was the boss of the second floor. Dake deduced according to the normal train of thought, and called the little demon to retreat to the corner. Only then did he summon his only flying-type magic guide fairy. "It's decided to be you, Hawkman." Hatcha. The magic fairy, wearing a wrestling mask, posed in an imposing manner. It also showed off its muscles. Deanna curiously raised her hand and touched her soft tendons, comparing them with the Hawkman's. Dake saw this scene and couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. He actually always had a question. How could a person who didn't have any muscles be so strong? What exactly was the so-called innate divine strength? Or was it that her muscles were only hard when they should be hard? Was it soft after being hard? Yes. I should touch it when I have the chance. Dake hurriedly interrupted his thoughts and explained the situation to the Hawkman. The Hawkman's ability to understand was very strong. It patted its chest to show that it understood. Then it immediately spread its wings and flew high. There was a sense of heroism that came from a warrior who would never return. As it flew towards the abyss, Dake's nerves gradually tensed up. If the horned eagle man were to fall midway, then he would only have one flying magic guide fairy left. Whoosh! Even at the edge of the abyss, the Hawkman didn't have any intention of slowing down. It flew into the abyss without fear, and in the blink of an eye, it had already flown directly above the middle of the abyss. It was only at this moment that its movements suddenly became a little sluggish. The coldness emitted from the abyss made it shiver uncontrollably. However, It still relied on the inertia of flight to quickly rush through the abyss and successfully arrived at the platform where the treasure chest was. The Hawkman was slightly delighted and immediately retracted its wings to land. Seeing that the treasure chest was right in front of it, it took a few steps forward, stretched out its wings, and tried to open the treasure chest. Then gotcha! The sound of a mechanism suddenly sounded. The treasure chest was successfully opened. Dake and the other two couldn't help but stick their bodies out from behind the wall and try their best to open their eyes. He saw that the treasure chest was filled with bits and pieces of treasures. There were things that looked like gold foil, pearls, and gems that emitted light. However, the most eye-catching thing was the weapon placed in the middle of the treasure chest. It was a rusty sheathless short sword. Surrounded by treasures, this rusty sword was as ordinary as a relic that could be seen everywhere on the battlefield. However, the more ordinary it was, the more special it gave off. The Hawkman tried to reach out and pick it up. However, as soon as its fingers touched it, a violent vibration suddenly came from under its feet. Immediately after, two dazzling red lights shot out from the bottom of the abyss. The red light illuminated the sky. An ear-piercing screech cut through the void. A terrifying tentacle full of suction cups shot out from below, as if it had eyes, and rolled towards the Hawkman on the platform. The Hawkman reacted extremely quickly. As it turned around, it turned its feathers into flying arrows and shot them out. However, the feathers that flew out couldn't even withstand the strong wind raised by the tentacle, and were blown away. The Hawkman wanted to spread its wings and fly high. However, just as it rose into the air, the tentacle had already attacked and entangled it tightly in an instant, unable to break free. At this critical moment, the Hawkman suddenly felt the call from its master. It immediately opened its mind and responded to the call. The tentacle suddenly exerted force, trying to pull it into the abyss. However, the Hawkman's body instantly turned into light and disappeared without a trace. Catch! The treasure chest closed automatically. The thick tentacle full of suction cups probed around the platform. After searching for nothing, it retracted back into the abyss. Phew! Seeing that the abyss returned to calm, Dake finally let out a sigh of relief and slightly raised the magic card in his hand. The Hawkman on the card showed a depressed expression. Dake rubbed its chest and praised, "Well done." The Hawkman couldn't help but blink. After seeing that its master's expression was indeed very serious, it turned into joy. It patted its chest hard and became proud again. Dake couldn't help but smile, and then looked up at the abyss. He recalled the Hawkman back into the magic card at the critical moment, allowing it to avoid the fate of being pulled into the abyss. However, that was only a temporary measure. The terrifying tentacle that drilled out from the abyss confirmed his conjecture. There were indeed monsters hidden in the abyss. As for whether the treasure chest was a trap or not, it was up to each person to decide. "Dake, what kind of monster is that?" Luosi couldn't help but ask. Dake shook his head slightly and said, "It looks like an octopus or a squid, but it's hard to tell what kind of monster it is with just one tentacle." Deanna exclaimed, "Just one tentacle is so thick. How big is its body?" Dake's expression was slightly gloomy. "I don't know, but it doesn't look like a monster that can be encountered on the second level. We may have unknowingly walked into a hidden space that connects to the lower level." The existence of hidden spaces had been confirmed. The Shungmalian underground city itself was a product of the distortion of time and space, and it had some characteristics similar to secret passages. In here, it was not impossible for anything to happen. Luosi quickly understood the meaning and couldn't help but panic. "Can we leave here?" Dake frowned slightly and said, "I've read a little bit of information. Generally speaking, this kind of hidden space can be exited, but after exiting, it's very likely that you won't be able to enter it again." After hearing that they could exit, Luosi was slightly relieved and then said, "Then what should we do next? Exit or continue?" Dake didn't hesitate. "Of course continue." Luosi asked, "But how do we continue?" Dake couldn't help but ponder, "Give me some time." In fact, at this moment, he had already thought of a way to seize the treasure chest, or rather, the item in the chest. But he was not only coveting the rusted sword in the treasure chest, but also the monster under the abyss. Could he seize the treasure and hunt the monster at the same time? This depended on the monster's strength. Just by looking at that tentacle, he could only judge that it was definitely more than 3 stars. But as for whether it was on the second or third step, he couldn't tell for the time being. And in the bottomless abyss, the milk can certainly not be used. So the only thing that could compete with it seemed to be the Basti beast. Maybe the dream demon could also fight it. Dake thought for a moment, and felt that fighting with the monster was too risky. It was better to take it and run. Finally, he looked at Deanna and Luosi and made a decision. Little devil beast. Here. When the little devil beast found that the Hawkman had returned from danger, it realized that it was time for it to show off. It had been waiting for Dake's call for a long time. Until Dake glared at it, it hurriedly covered its mouth and laughed dryly to show that it was just a syllable, not a sound. Fortunately, Deanna and Luosi's attention was not on this. Facing the two's doubts, Dake quickly said, "Get ready, we may need to run in a moment." As soon as these words came out, Deanna and Luosi realized that Dake wanted to seize the treasure and quickly escape. The two of them heaved a sigh of relief. Even Deanna did not want to face such a huge monster hidden in the abyss. After Dake made his intentions clear, he immediately took out a magic card, held it between his index finger and middle finger, and placed it in front of his chest. The surface of the magic card was pure black gold. Just a glance at it gave people confidence out of nowhere. It was Pride 3. Swipe the card, evolve. As his right hand moved, the surface of Pride 3 immediately released a strong light. The little devil beast's forehead lit up with the Pride emblem, absorbing and gathering the light of Pride 3. Its body quickly turned into light, and its whole body was wrapped in strong light. Its body structure changed drastically. Roar. Accompanied by a fierce roar, the broken bat wings angrily spread out and broke the light ball. The dark fallen angel had once again arrived in the human world. The tall devil beast's eyes were slightly slanted, and its eyebrows were filled with unchanging arrogance. Teleportation, magic consumption 100, maximum movement 100 meters. Magic consumption sharply increases after 100 meters, cooldown 15 seconds. Although the devil beast was very disdainful of Dake's take-and-run plan, it still faithfully carried out his orders. First, it flew over the abyss and arrived at the small platform where the treasure chest was placed. During this period, it had to be careful of the monsters at the bottom of the abyss. If there were any abnormal movements, it would immediately use teleportation to move to the platform and wait 15 seconds before opening the treasure chest and taking the sword. When the devil beast flew over the abyss, it clearly sensed that there were monsters below. But the monsters did not attack. Suddenly its pupils shrank. Its pupils constricted as it abruptly turned its head to the left. When did a hole appear in the wall on the left side of the abyss? 2 in 1 4200 plus 6 Chapter 342. I told you before, don't summon the troll without thinking. You still have other magic elves. But AI Ma, the troll is my strongest magic elven. I know it's very powerful, but can you not keep mentioning it? You brought it up first. I'm saying, can't you see the situation clearly before you act? Not every magic creature can be dealt with by the troll. For now, it can be done. I. As a hole silently appeared in the wall on the left side of the abyss, there was suddenly a fierce quarrel from within. The sound was extremely loud, and the quarreling parties didn't seem to care that they were in an underground city full of magic creatures, and just kept on raising their voices. And in the midst of the quarrel between the man and woman, there seemed to be a weak voice trying to mediate, but it was obviously of no use. Website. https://m. Vipcanchu. VIP. The demonic beast's 5 senses were very sharp, and it recognized the identity of the group in a single encounter. It couldn't help but frown. It wasn't that it was concerned about the sudden appearance of the group of 3, but that their loud quarrel was very unfavorable to its current situation. As expected, the demonic beast immediately sensed that the terrifying magic creature, hiding in the dark abyss below, was clearly moving. Not good. Its thoughts moved, and it fiercely stared at the entrance of the passage, and then it fiercely flapped its wings, and suddenly accelerated. the demonic beast's abrupt action, and the sudden quarrel made Dake, and the other two hiding in the corner immediately raised their alarm. The magic cards in Deanna and Luoxi's hands were already flashing with light. Dark, on the other hand, was more thoughtful. He tried his best to look in the direction of the quarrel. When he saw that there was a passageway in the wall that was originally empty, he suddenly had a very bad premonition. But he didn't have time to think carefully, and he saw that the demonic beast had already landed on that platform. But before the demonic beast touched the treasure chest, the ground under its feet violently shook. Just like what happened to the horned eagle man before. Two dazzling red lights suddenly shot out, like searchlights, and dyed the walls and ceiling a bloody red. Then, that familiar ear-piercing shriek pierced through the air. A black shadow spread out from the bottom of the abyss. As the red light converged, darkness invaded, and granular black fog quickly spread. The terrifying tentacle covered in suction cups shot out from the black fog, and waved wildly in the air. It didn't immediately attack the evil demonic beast. For a moment, whether it was Dake's trio or the demon beast, they all stopped moving. The quarrel coming from the newly opened tunnel also came to an abrupt end. White and Aima were walking in front. Just as they turned a corner, they saw the moment when the huge tentacle popped out. The two of them were horrified and hurriedly covered their mouths. Then Luoboat walked out from behind. Before he formed the team, he never thought that he, who should have had the worst relationship with Aima, would have to play the role of a peacemaker. He clearly didn't have such a position. However, White, who took the initiative to invite Aima, had a dispute with Aima after they encountered the first wave of monsters. This made him feel very inconceivable. It seemed that the two of them had a conflict on the idea of exploring the underground city, which gradually turned into an irreconcilable contradiction. But fortunately, the two of them still had their strength, and he also had a trump card that could be used at critical moments, so the journey was smooth. But the atmosphere was getting worse and worse. Seeing that they might be forced to return if the quarrel continued, Luoboat had been trying his best to salvage the situation. But sure enough, it didn't have any effect. Just as he was feeling despair, the ground suddenly shook violently, and a shriek came from nearby. White and Aima, who were walking in front, were silent at the same time. He walked out of the corner full of doubts, and finally saw the terrifying tentacle that was thicker than White's monster. Luoboat's loud voice couldn't be suppressed anymore. He covered his head and screamed in fear. "Shut up! Shut up! Luoboat!" Aima and White quickly turned around and shouted in a low voice. Luoboat saw the two's anxious expressions, and his throat suddenly sucked in air at the same time as he exhaled. Then the shriek suddenly stopped, and then he coughed violently. Aima and White didn't care about his situation. The two of them quickly turned their heads and stared at the giant tentacle that suddenly stopped dancing because of Luoboat's shriek. The motionless tentacle seemed to be even more terrifying than when it was wildly dancing. Aima and White could clearly hear their hearts beating violently. The two of them suppressed their fear, and as they slightly bent down to retreat, their fingers carefully poked at their card packs. In the silence, the atmosphere seemed to be squeezed into the center of a vortex, and it became more and more intense. The tip of the tentacle suddenly split into 7 cracks. Then it instantly opened into 8 petals, forming a bloody mouth. The inner wall of each petal was covered with fine and dense sharp teeth, and sticky saliva flowed in the mouth. A bright red tongue with a mouth stretched out from the inside of the tentacle, making a hissing sound. Then the tentacle aimed its head at the entrance of the passage where White and the other two were, and the terrifying giant mouth slowly contracted. Aima and White quietly looked at each other, and then simultaneously retreated to the corner. They moved extremely slowly, and their eyes were fixed on the tentacle from beginning to end, not daring to move away in the slightest. They were so cautious. But Luoboat still couldn't stop coughing. Aima and White, who carefully didn't dare to make the slightest sound, gave people a very strange feeling. People couldn't help but think, what was the point of doing this? Just a moment of stagnation. The tentacle that opened its giant 8-petaled mouth suddenly moved. From stillness to shooting out, the tentacle's speed was extremely fast, like lightning. "Run!" White suddenly grabbed Luoboat's arm, and pulled him to the corner. In front of Emma, a golden beast in the shape of a Tawu was instantly formed. Roar! The golden beast roared, and a ferocious aura erupted. Under the Archmage's command, it fearlessly rushed towards the tentacle that had already drilled into the passage. But the 8-petaled mouth at the tip of the tentacle suddenly opened and swallowed it whole. Before it slid into the tentacle, Aima clearly saw that its hard golden body was easily corroded and melted by the mucus inside the tentacle. This discovery made Aima's pupils instantly dilate. Even though she realized that the tentacle was a terrifying monster beyond imagination, she still didn't expect that her golden beast couldn't even block a single attack. No, it couldn't even block it for a moment. While the tentacle swallowed the golden beast, it continued to rush forward. Luoboat had already escaped into the corner with White pulling him. Aima herself also retreated, and after a glance, turned around in a panic. After that, the three of them didn't say anything, and just kept running. That tentacle actually drilled into the passage, and nimbly turned the corner like a python, and continued to chase. Troll! Feeling the strong stench of the tentacle almost licking her back, Aima suddenly screamed. The magic card in White's hand instantly lit up with a strong light. I told you the troll was useful. But as soon as the troll he was so proud of was summoned, it was smashed by the tentacle. The roar of the troll was instantly drowned out by the sound of the tentacle rubbing against the wall of the passage. Luoboat, who had finally recovered, resisted the discomfort in his throat, and pulled out one of Vlad's legacy cards from his card pack. But his usual summoning speed was really too slow. 10 seconds of summoning time was really too long at that time. Just as the three of them were about to lose all hope, the forward momentum of the tentacle suddenly stagnated. Under their incredulous gazes, the 8-petaled mouth at the tip of the tentacle actually retracted. And then the whole tentacle actually started to retreat. Has it reached its limit? White was sweating profusely and panting violently. Aima leaned against the wall, and only felt that her legs were as soft as cotton. Luoboat sat down. The three of them had escaped death, but their minds were a mess. They couldn't react to what had happened in such a short time. What the hell is going on? Vaguely, they seemed to have heard someone's voice. On the other side, Dake Dimming saw the tentacle rush into the passage where the sound of quarreling was coming from, and his pupil suddenly shrank, and he unconsciously walked out from behind the wall. Dake, Luo-si called out softly, but Dake's attention was all on the tentacle. His gaze moved down the body of the tentacle, trying to see through the black fog to see the body of the tentacle. But only 2 balls of red light could be seen through the black fog, and they seemed to be 2 huge eyes. When his gaze turned to the 2 balls of red light, he suddenly felt a strange suction force, as if it was trying to suck him in. But the moment he noticed the abnormality, he exerted a little force and looked away. As far as his eyes could see, the tentacle was still stretching out from the black fog, madly drilling into the passage on the left wall. His mind, which had been in a trance because of the 2 balls of red light in the abyss, suddenly became clear again. Dake's gaze gradually became sharp. He instantly analyzed the situation and grasped the key at this time. Then he immediately issued an order to the demonic beast. Demonic beast, open the chest. After the shout, the demonic beast on the platform immediately understood. It bent down and reached out without hesitation, grabbed the iron clasp of the treasure chest, and then pulled hard, lifting the iron clasp of the treasure chest together with the lid. The gold foil, pearls, and gems hidden in the treasure chest emitted a luxurious color, and the rusty dagger without a scabbard was still lying quietly in the middle of the treasures. If such a treasure chest full of treasures was found in the underground city outside, adventurers would most likely abandon the rusty dagger, which looked like trash, and take away the gold foil, pearls, and gems without leaving anything behind. Just those treasures were enough to make a poor adventurer become a rich man in a small place. With that money, one could buy a medium-sized piece of land, build a house, and buy a small farm, and live comfortably for the rest of one's life. But this was the Shangmalian. No one would be blinded by such a small amount of treasures. After becoming a magister, there were many ways to gain wealth. If those pearls and gems were exchanged for a monthly ticket of 10,000 credits, it would probably be more attractive. Therefore, the demonic beast directly ignored those glowing gems that could drive Meow Meow crazy. Its long arms that were vertical to its knees suddenly stretched out, and its huge sharp demon claws grabbed the rusty dagger. There was no reaction. The demonic beast did not feel any fluctuation that could be called value when it held the rusty dagger, but it did not throw it away because of this. According to Dake's plan, after it grabbed the rusty dagger, it immediately turned around and prepared to use instant transmission to directly transfer from the platform to the tunnel where Dake was, and then immediately run away. But suddenly it heard Dake's loud order, "Fly over here." Fly over? The demonic beast's eyes could not help but glance at the tentacle that drilled into the hole. Of course, it did not think that such a tentacle could threaten its powerful self, but if it was entangled by such a disgusting tentacle, its image would be damaged, wouldn't it? So, although it was repulsed, the demonic beast still flapped its wings and took off according to Dake's order. It was less than 100 meters from the platform to the tunnel where Dake was. But after it got the rusty dagger, it could clearly feel the malice from the bottom of the abyss, which pounced on it as if it was real. Humph! It suddenly snorted coldly. The demonic beast broke through the malice, rushed through the abyss, and rushed into the tunnel. Hiss! The movement behind it suddenly became louder. The demonic beast suddenly turned back, and saw that the tentacle that drilled into the left tunnel had retracted. It was opening its terrifying 8-petaled mouth and biting from behind. Claw of Death! A decisive order came into its ears. The demonic beast raised its left hand and waved its huge sharp demon claws forward. The power of darkness surged. Countless claws of death were condensed, densely covering the demonic beast's vision. Roar! But the demonic beast's killing move only stopped the tentacle for a moment, and it continued to pounce. The demonic beast frowned, and was about to use instant transmission to dodge. But Dake's voice came from behind again. Claw of Death! Claw of Death! The demonic beast was confused. Even the Claw of Death could only stop the tentacle for a moment. What was the use of a single Claw of Death? But in the next moment, it saw the tentacle light up with a blazing white light. It was the light of a superpower. There's only a moment. This thought flashed through the demonic beast's mind. Then it let go of the rusty dagger and let it fall to the ground, choosing the right arm that it usually used. Sure enough, when its right arm expanded and the sharp claw of death grabbed the tentacle that had already closed in, a surge of power that broke through the limit burst out. Squeak! 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 4000/8000 Recommendation Vote. Monthly Vote. Chapter 343. Pfft! It was as if it had hit a broken piece of cotton wool. The terrifying tentacle quickly softened under the encirclement of the superpower, and half of its strength disappeared. The demonic beast took advantage of this short moment, and swung a claw of death at the head of the tentacle. As the battle went on, the demonic beast's claw of death instantly pierced through the body of the tentacle, and tore the entire piece of flesh apart. A corrosive liquid that could melt a gold beast gushed out from the wound. The demonic beast took advantage of the victory, and pulled hard along the torn wound. It tore the tentacle's 8-petaled mouth into a 9-petaled mouth. Roar! It raised its head and let out an angry roar. Then its left arm went straight in. With both hands, it continued to tear. The wound became bigger and bigger, and the mucus that flowed out crazily covered the ground. Remember the website, MVIP, can't you? 6. However, before it could enjoy itself, it heard Dake's voice again from behind. Retreat! There was no trace of hesitation. The demonic beast suddenly let go of the tentacle, stomped its feet, and flew backward. After a moment, a terrifying water ball made of corrosive liquid suddenly spewed out from the mouth of the tentacle. The water ball exploded in the air with a bang, and the corrosive liquid that could easily corrode a gold beast burst out in all directions. Deanna and Luosi retracted their heads in time after Dake's reminder. However, the demonic beast still suffered the sputtering of the corrosive liquid. Even if it crossed its claws and wrapped its demonic wings around its body, it could not completely block it. The claws that condensed more dark power were not corroded, but the wings that were already full of holes were severely damaged. A red light flashed in its eyes, and its ferocious aura suddenly exploded. The dark power wrapped in a thick black fog spread from the root of its demonic wings all the way to the tip and spread out angrily. Boom! As its feet spun, the dark power condensed in the demonic wings turned into two beams of light and shot out. It was a sure kill skill. Razor wings. Boom boom boom. The extremely destructive beams of light accurately shot into the gap at the tip of the tentacle, causing a fatal blow to its insides. Screech. An ear-piercing, insect-like shriek came from the tentacle, and it abruptly retreated. So you can be scared too. The evil demonic beast immediately laughed wildly in its heart. It flapped its wings and wanted to take advantage of the situation to pursue and attack. Stop. The command behind him grabbed his reins again. Dake poked his head out from behind the wall. The Dilu beast that was following closely behind him exerted strength in its legs and leaped out. It was agile, avoiding the corrosive liquid on the ground, and quickly came to the side of the devil beast. Then, with a kick of its foot, it picked up the rusted sword and grabbed it with its hand. Time to go. Dake's train of thought was exceptionally clear, and he wasn't greedy at all. With the help of Kettles, equal power distribution and Ibia's, Pride 2 knew. Help! The demon beast managed to heavily injure the terrifying tentacle. But it was just a tentacle. What was hidden at the bottom of the abyss? Were there more tentacles? Or an even more terrifying monster? Everything was still unknown. There were countless stories of adventurers exploring the unknown, experiencing dangers and overcoming death to obtain success. But in fact, there were even more people who fell in the exploration of the unknown. Adventurers never take risks. This was a warning. In the face of danger without knowing anything, it could only be a helpless choice. Not everyone was a protagonist who could lock in their HP. Not to mention, the greatest treasure was already in their hands. If they didn't leave now, when would they? Tisk. The evil demonic beast gave the tentacle that had retreated to the edge of the abyss a final glare. It maintained its posture of facing the enemy and retreated. The Dilu beast that had picked up the rusted sword used it as a shield and quickly returned to Dake's side. The tentacle was like a cobra shaking its head. Although it had retreated to the edge of the abyss, it was still waiting for an opportunity to move. The danger was still not over. From time to time, the squirming sound from the bottom of the abyss stimulated the nerves. It seemed that something was about to wake up. When the evil demonic beast's footsteps had retreated to the edge of the corner, an even more ear-piercing hissing sound suddenly came from the bottom of the abyss. A tentacle that was twice the size of the first tentacle surged out, bringing with it a tidal wave of black mist. The pitch-black liquid poured down from its body and flowed back into the abyss. Dake became nervous for a moment. "You guys go first," he said to Deanna and Luosi. Ha! Deanna was puzzled. But Luosi immediately took her hand and showed enough rationality in this dangerous moment. Wait. However, just as she was about to move, she suddenly noticed a trace of strangeness. The new tentacle that drilled out didn't rush toward them. Instead, it opened its ugly 8-petaled mouth and rushed toward the passage on the left wall. No. The scream from the passage made Dake and the other two realize that White and the others were back. Maybe it was because of curiosity about the abyss, or maybe it wanted to know who led the tentacle away, or maybe it was simply because it didn't want to die. After White and the other two escaped from death, they carefully came back. AI Mametis was the smartest of the three, but unfortunately, she was also the most curious. It was said that curiosity killed the cat. Excessive curiosity could drive people to improve themselves. It could also cause people to die. When she suggested that she wanted to go back and take a look, White didn't stop her. And Luo Boat didn't have the right to speak in this 3-person team. He could only desperately hold the 4 magic cards left by the vampire Vlad, and prepare to fight for his life at the critical moment. The 3 people who came back to the passage nervously looked around. The abyss that was shrouded in black fog made them fearful. The treasure chest on the platform made them greedy. In the other passage, the demonic beast that was fighting with the tentacle made them realize that Dake Dimming was on the move. After confirming that Dake was there, even White felt a sense of security for no reason. But what followed was an even stronger sense of competitiveness. Why? Why is it like this every time I'm in danger? White clenched his fists tightly. When he was chased by the tentacle, he wasn't completely forced into a dead end. At that time, he still had a chance to counterattack. White, AI Ma, and Luobo each had their own thoughts. It wasn't until a second, thicker and longer tentacle drilled out of the abyss that the three people's faces showed panic again. At that moment, they thought that this new tentacle was going to help the previous one that was at a disadvantage. They didn't expect that this tentacle would pounce on them without hesitation. No, the scream came from Luobo. But this time he was already holding the magic card in his hand, and the magic in his body subconsciously poured into the magic card that could release a large number of blood bats. He didn't know why, but when Vlad used these magic cards that didn't require extra magic to be activated, he had to pour in a large amount of magic to use them. This was a very bad sign for him, who had very ordinary magic talent. During this time, he had also tried to give these 4 magic cards to White. However, the 4 magic cards that Vlad made had a strong personal imprint. Although White could trigger their feedback, he still couldn't use them normally. Robert chanted the incantation of the normal summoning spell with all his might. With the infusion of large amounts of mana, the surface of the magic card was already covered in a scarlet mist, and the phantoms of blood-red bats were flying about in the mist. This magic card was called Vampiric Assault. The foundation of the spell originated from the category of blood magic, and it could release a large number of blood bats to attack. Once bitten by the blood bats, part of the blood would be sucked away. Its basic power was slightly lacking, but the number of blood bats was large enough. Even if it couldn't be used to attack, it could still create a large number of blood bats to cover the sky and the earth, and use it to escape. The vampire Vlad had used the same method back then, and Luobo also used this method. The blood bats flew out like a swarm of bees and swarmed towards the tentacle. The dense number of blood bats actually blocked the entire passage. However, in front of the tentacle, this was nothing but deceiving oneself. The tentacle only hesitated for a moment before rushing into the passage again, crushing the group of blood bats into a bloody pulp. Run! AI Ma had already run around the corner, and she quickly stuck her head out and shouted. Luobo glanced at the tentacle that broke through the swarm of blood bats. His face twisted in fear as he turned around in a panic. However, as soon as he turned around, he saw White standing there nervously. She was holding a magic card with both hands, as if she was holding a sword. That magic card was emitting a golden light that was gradually intensifying. It was the Holy Sword. The Holy Sword incantation was a magic card before it was used, which was also the category of magic cards. However, after it was used once, the card would record information and become the weapon card. White's Holy Sword incantation had indeed transformed into the Holy Sword. The Holy Sword should be very powerful, right? Luobo, who had not seen the power of the Holy Sword with his own eyes, could only imagine. When he ran past White, he heard White's roar in his ears. In the name of White Gouda, I summoned the Holy Sword. In an instant, the golden light of the Holy Sword suddenly expanded into the shape of a sword. A blurry Holy Sword of light appeared in White's hands. The Holy Sword of Brave Brett was a part of the statue that stood in the various squares of the kingdom all year round. Almost everyone had seen it. However, the Holy Sword in White's hands did not have a complete shape. Obviously, it was still in some kind of early stage. It was just a blurry shape of a sword of light. But even so, the strong light released by the Holy Sword still burst out with a strong holy aura. The tentacle was illuminated by the golden light and stopped moving. White held the Holy Sword with both hands, a drop of sweat slowly rolling down his forehead. He had indeed summoned his Holy Sword. But what should he do next? Charge with the Holy Sword and slash randomly? Slash randomly at such a large tentacle monster? Without a systematic swordsmanship lesson, he did not know what to do with the Holy Sword. White's heart was unprecedentedly nervous, but he did not dare to move. At the moment when he was facing the tentacle, it was as if he was staring at a snake. It was as if the snake would pounce and bite him if he looked away. But the tentacle was not a cobra. Even if he did not look away, it would still pounce and bite him. From extreme stillness to extreme movement, the tentacle suddenly moved without warning. White's heart was alarmed, and he subconsciously raised the holy sword of light in his hand and slashed down. Ah! The return of White's trio made Dake frown. It was not easy for him to lure the first tentacle over by opening the treasure chest strategy. He did not expect White's trio not to run away, but to return. They are not going against their lives, they are going against Professor Nini's credits. Dake could not help but sigh. The dungeon escape device was a one-time item, and each item was expensive. Students usually rented it when they entered the dungeon. Although the seniors could afford it, they were not willing to spend such a large sum of credits at once. They would always fantasize that if they did not use it, it would be a huge loss. Therefore, there were not many students who bought the dungeon escape device. Once a student who did not have enough credits accidentally activated the dungeon escape device in the dungeon, it would be time for them to bear the debt. The dungeon escape device was bought by the college. The interest after the debt was not high, but it was not zero. If there was no threat of compound interest, many students would refuse to repay the debt. The college hoped to use this to create pressure and urge the students to improve. Of course, from the perspective of the students, it was difficult for them to understand the college's painstaking efforts. They would only complain about the interest. Now that the dungeon escape device was rented by Professor Nini, she would be the one to repay it. Because of the existence of the dungeon escape device, Dake was not overly worried about the safety of the three of them. However, Luosi and Deanna were not as mature as him. When Luosi realized that the new tentacle had rushed into the tunnel, she said nervously, "Dake, what should we do now?" Dake measured the distance between them and looked at the tentacle on his side. He said in a low voice, "Once bitten, twice shy. Moreover, I am not their nanny." Luosi said, "That's true." However, White's shout when she held the sword had touched Luosi. She grabbed the magic card in her hand and hesitated. "There will be shadows." Dake looked at the magic card in her hand and had an idea. He said, "Summon it." Luosi said, Dake said, "Send the magic fairy over." People have an evil side, and they also have a good side. The fickleness of the world would smooth out a person's edges and sometimes make people afraid to show kindness. However, few people would stop others from doing good. Every bit of kindness after careful consideration was rare and precious. If one could grow up surrounded by kindness when they were young, even if they saw the evil side when they grew up, they would not lose their original heart. When Luosi summoned the Mobius worm, the demon beast immediately understood and used the instant transmission. White Gouda welcomed its savior. 8000/8000, mission timeout. Mission failed. New mission activated 0/8000, buy a ticket to get on the train. Chapter 344. Aha! Shouting with all his might could bring courage. White Gouda raised the holy sword and poured all his magical power into it. The holy sword of light burst out with a dazzling golden light as it slashed down. The sword body expanded sharply in the sword light, and in the blink of an eye, it was several meters long and cut into the tentacle's body without any hindrance. When White realized it, the holy sword of light had already penetrated it and cut a terrible wound on its body. Stinky mucus spewed out from the wound and flowed to the ground, accumulating into a pool. After the tentacle was pierced by his sword, it suddenly stopped moving. It raised its tip, and its 8-petaled mouth faced White. The tongue in its mouth hissed and stretched out from time to time. White couldn't help but look up at it. His hands holding the sword trembled slightly. When the sword cut into the tentacle's body, it didn't seem to encounter any hindrance, as if it directly penetrated into it. 1 second to remember https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. But at this moment, he tried to pull the sword out, but found that the holy sword of light was stuck in the tentacle's body and couldn't be pulled out at all. This made his face gradually turn pale. In this strange stalemate, the atmosphere in this passage gradually became tense. Behind White, Luoboat had turned around again, but he looked at the tentacle monster, and White who was holding the holy sword. He didn't even dare to breathe. He was afraid that if he made a slight movement, it would be the fuse that would make the tentacle move. AI Ma, who was already behind the corner wall, held the golden treasure box in her hand, but even she felt that the golden treasure box, as spiritual control, would have no effect on the tentacle, just like how White didn't place his hopes on taboo love. Because it was really hard to imagine that the tentacle monster would be confused by gold and love. Instead of using the golden treasure box, it would be more effective to summon 1 or 2 magic spirits to attract the tentacle monster's attention. AI Ma's fingers kept flipping between several magic cards. But just like Luo Boat, she also subconsciously didn't want to break the deadlock. Pucci. Suddenly, when White exerted force again, the holy sword of light was abruptly pulled out again. The sudden change in the situation made him feel even more flustered. The tentacle monster's body trembled the moment the holy light sword was pulled out. The tongue in its mouth was as agile as a snake. It suddenly shot out of its mouth, and then retracted again. No one knew what it was thinking about, but it still didn't move. But White was really scared. The holy sword of light that had just been pulled out was once again raised by him. The light of the holy sword soared into the sky, and the golden light squeezed out from the gap, illuminating the void on the left side of the abyss. Aha! In his panic, Werther once again slashed out with his sword. This time, he was even more focused, and the golden light of the holy sword was even more stable. However, when the sword slashed down, it was as if it had slashed down on leather. It did not have the slightest feeling of penetrating, like before. White opened his eyes wide and discovered that there was only a scratch on the tentacle monster's body. 2 slashes of the sword, 2 completely different results. White found it hard to accept this reality. This time, he immediately slashed out after sheathing the sword, then sheathing the sword again, slashing again, sheathing the sword again and slashing again. The speed of his slashes gradually became faster, but the sword marks on the tentacle monster's body became shallower and shallower. In the end, even the wound caused by the first slash was perfectly healed. Clearly, the tentacle monster did not move at all, allowing White to slash his sword continuously, but the pressure it emitted was getting stronger and stronger. White closed his eyes and slashed out one last time. This slash gathered almost all the strength in his body. However, the feeling of penetrating from the first slash still did not appear, and the skin of the tentacle monster suddenly became as hard as steel. The holy sword of light slashed on the skin of the tentacle monster, as if it had slashed on steel, and the sword blade condensed by the golden light suddenly collapsed. The 3-meter-long holy sword actually broke at the place where the sword blade collapsed. White stared at the place where the sword slashed, his shoulders drooping, and he gasped for breath. This last slash with all his strength was actually unable to leave a mark on the skin of the tentacle monster. White could not help but let go of his 5 fingers, allowing the holy sword of light to dissipate into light. His whole body subconsciously began to step back. It was this step back. The tentacle monster's tongue suddenly made a hissing sound. The tentacle monster that had not moved until now also moved. Run! Luo Boat suddenly roared. White only felt his wrist being pulled back, and his whole body tilted because of this. He took the opportunity to turn and run. His unguarded back was exposed to the tentacle monster. A beam of light passed by him, and fell between him and the tentacle monster. The bronze soldiers, that were fully clad in bronze armor, quickly appeared in the light. The moment it materialized, the bronze soldier followed Emma's orders and unsheathed his bronze longsword. Facing the terrifying tentacle monster, he unleashed his only sure-kill skill. Horizontal sweep. The sweep, that could wipe out thousands of troops. In addition to changing the attack range from a point to a surface, the only effect of sweep was repel. But the wind pressure released from the long sword could not shake the huge tentacle monster at all. The 3-star bronze soldier could not cross the level gap, and the additional effect of the killing skill did not have any effect in front of the tentacle monster. But at least, it succeeded in stalling the tentacle monster for a few seconds with its own sacrifice. These few seconds were enough for Luo Boat to pull White, who was a little dazed, into a corner. Then the 3 of them, as if repeating history, ran desperately along this passage again. Crunch, crunch. The bronze soldier was chewed and swallowed. Then it turned into magic light spots in the belly of the tentacle. The bronze soldier, magic card in AI Ma's hand turned gray. Don't just stand there, summon the magic fairy. Her face turned pale, and she hurriedly said. White and Luoboat took out their respective magic cards and began to summon. 2 magic fairies appeared behind the 3 of them. With the intention of sacrificing themselves, they rushed towards the tentacle that was chasing after them. But this tentacle was bigger and thicker than the previous one, and the 2 magic fairies could not stop it at all. It twisted its body and rolled over the bodies of the 2 magic elves. In just a short 10 seconds, it caught up with White and the other 2. The 8-petaled mouth at the tip of the tentacle suddenly opened. White, who was running at the back, turned around subconsciously, and was shocked by the dense and sharp teeth that made him scream. He suddenly burst out with unprecedented speed, but the sudden acceleration caused him to step on Luoboat's heel. Luoboat suddenly staggered. White could not stabilize his body and crashed into his back. If Luoboat's lower body was not stable enough, the 2 of them would have rolled on the ground. But even so, the 2 of them were forced to slow down their speed. The pitch-black shadow suddenly tilted towards them. The tentacle had unknowingly appeared above their heads, its 8-petaled mouth swaying left and right, as if it was thinking about who to bite first. White and Luoboat sped up again under the shadow's shroud, but the distance between them did not increase at all. White, what do we do? Luoboat realized that he could not escape. White's face was pale, and he did not know what to do. The dungeon escape device. AI Ma, who was running in front, suddenly turned around and pointed at the wristwatch like dungeon escape device on his wrist and shouted, "Activate it." Luoboat and White only then remembered that they still had the dungeon escape device. The 2 of them were overjoyed and immediately tried to activate it with their mana. Activating the dungeon escape device was better than being forced to activate it after being swallowed. As for whether they would be laughed at later on, the 2 of them had no time to think about that. But just as Luoboat stretched out his hand to press on his dungeon escape device, his peripheral vision suddenly turned pitch black. He turned his head abruptly, and was shocked to find that his close friend who was running behind him had disappeared into thin air. Subconsciously, Luoboat raised his head in fear, and saw his best friend's legs through the 8-petaled mouth of the tentacle. White! He suddenly stopped and let out a heart-wrenching scream. AI Ma, who was about to activate the dungeon escape device, also stopped. They did not have a deep understanding of the mechanism of the dungeon escape device. Seeing that the dungeon escape device did not activate after White was caught by the tentacle, they almost thought that White's dungeon escape device was damaged. In the midst of panic, in his desperation, Robert pulled out the other cards Vlad had left him. However, he could only summon a 3-star Bloodmother Bat, and that wasn't enough to change the situation. Also, the cooldown of the summoning spell was not over yet. In the midst of despair, Luoboat's vision suddenly blurred as he saw a black shadow flashing above the tentacle. For a moment, he thought that he was hallucinating because of his despair. But then, the black shadow attacked the back of the tentacle's mouth. The extended devil's claw clenched into a fist and punched down with the power of Death Claw. Roar! There was a sudden tearing sound from the inside of the tentacle. The 8-petaled mouth that caught White opened and vomited out the struggling White as if it was vomiting. Luoboat ignored the dripping mucus and rushed forward to catch White's body. White barely landed on the ground and hurriedly supported himself against the wall as he vomited. After the tentacle caught him, although it did not spit out any corrosive liquid, the stinky mucus in its mouth still made him extremely nauseous. Extreme disgust and extreme fear. It was a double vomit. At this moment, even though White's body was covered in mucus and his vomit was stinky, Luoboat still forcibly pulled his hand and pulled him back regardless of his resistance. It's Dake's magic guide sprite. AI Ma's joyful voice entered Luoboat's ears. That key name finally gave him a sense of security. Dake is here to save us. Luoboat could not help but be pleasantly surprised. Ugh! White vomited even more fiercely. But while they were pleasantly surprised, Luoboat and AI Ma did not let down their guard. The strength of the tentacle was obvious to all. If it was only the 4-star demon beast that came, They might not be able to escape misfortune. It was only when the demon beast flew down from the tentacle's head and stood upright with its back facing them that the two of them noticed that there was another magic guide sprite beside it. It was a ball that they had never seen before. It was as black as ink and had no flaws on its body. On the surface of the ball, there was only a ray of divine light circulating, giving people the feeling that it was a living creature. Then, the two of them were shocked to discover that the demon beast actually took 2 steps back, allowing the ball to hit it. Is that also Dake's magic guide sprite? Luobo could not help but ask. Aima watched nervously and only subconsciously replied, "How would I know?" Of course they could not know. After all, Luosi had never participated in any competitions other than the in-class competition, and the number of times she entered the laboratory was basically the same as Deanna, although the number of times she succeeded was slightly less due to the difference in credits. It was impossible that she did not gain anything. In addition to the Mobius worm, Luosi also had an Aurora Moon Rabbit, which was also an extremely rare magic guide sprite. In fact, even Dake did not know much about Luosi's magic guide sprite. Thus, it was even more impossible for the demon beast to know how powerful this Mobius worm was. It only followed Dake's orders and transported the Mobius worm over. If the Mobius worm could indeed block the tentacle, it would carry out its next order, return immediately. Although the first tentacle was injured, it did not completely retreat, and was still waiting for an opportunity to move at the entrance of the passage. Once the demon beast was gone, Dake and the other two would not be completely safe. Sending the Mobius worm over was already the greatest display of goodwill. How should they deal with it? It still depended on White and the other two's own judgment. If everything was resolved for them, the dungeon would lose the meaning of being adventurous. The demon beast retreated a few more steps and tried to distance itself from the Mobius worm as much as possible. It was also at this moment that the tentacle that took its punch finally came back to its senses. Hiss! After a threatening shriek, the tentacle did not care about the Mobius worm in front of it, and opened its mouth to pounce on the demon beast behind it. But just as it was about to step over the Mobius worm, a rainbow-colored halo immediately bloomed from the pitch-black sphere. The halo was like a Mobius belt, and only had one side. With the Mobius worm as the center, it slowly rotated and spread out a huge force field. Once it entered the range of this force field, it was as if it was deep in mud. Regardless of whether it was a physical or magical impact, it would be absorbed by the force field. In the end, it would be converted into pure energy and circulate on the surface of the halo. Just as the tentacle rushed in, it suddenly felt its strength drain away, and its body went soft. It was so frightened that it immediately retreated. A1 quietly appeared above the Mobius worm's head. That was the number representing the energy scale. 4000/8000. Overtime warning, beep beep beep. Chapter 345. Card name, Mobius worm. Type, elf card. Level, *****. Race, insect. Attribute, super. Magic, 1200. Attack, 0 defense, 2000. Ultimate skill, Mobius ring energy scale, ultrasonic wave. A mere 3-star magic elf was actually able to block the attack of the tentacle. Website, https://m. Vipcanshu. VIP. The red light in the eyes of the demon beast gradually intensified. It seemed to see the shadow of Kettle on this Mobius worm. But compared to Kettle, Mobius worm undoubtedly had a completely different ability. The one that appeared on top of its head might be some kind of superimposed status mark, or it might be a warning of its limit. The demon beast did not understand this. But from the looks of it, Mobius worm seemed to be much more useful than it imagined. Therefore, even if it immediately returned, there should be no problem, right? It glanced at White and the other two, who were still vomiting, and the demon beast's mouth could not help but curve up. 3 pieces of trash. It sneered in its heart, and its arrogance gradually overflowed. Hiss! After the tentacle retracted, it only observed for a few seconds before it revealed its ferocious appearance again, and launched a second attack. But this attack was just like before. The power that it gathered almost instantly disappeared, and the end that was trapped in the force field became soft and powerless. Its 8-petaled mouth softly opened outward, and saliva dripped down. It once again retracted its head in horror. Witnessing this scene, the demonic beast turned its back to Werther and the other two. It raised its hand and made a bye-bye gesture, and its huge body disappeared from their sight without any warning. The demon beast's tall and strong body should have protected them like a solid mountain wall, giving them a constant sense of security. Because of this, its sudden disappearance caused an unexpected panic. It was like the wall protecting the city suddenly collapsing. There was no barrier between humans and beasts in an instant, which would inevitably cause panic. Where did it go? Luoboat couldn't help but panic. AI Ma was a bit calmer, but after looking around all corners and not finding any demon beasts, she finally couldn't hold back her expression. It's very likely that it went back. After all, there's also a tentacle over there. We can't hesitate anymore. Set up the white. If you don't want this dungeon adventure to end prematurely, start running. AI Ma gritted his teeth and whispered to Luoboat. Luoboat's mind was still in a mess, but due to his trust in Brainiac, he followed AI Ma's instructions instinctively. Blurg. White spat out some solid and liquid mixture again and said, "You don't have to help me. I can walk." Luoboat's ability to move at critical moments was still very strong. He judged that White could not walk normally, so he ignored him and started running. Seeing that they had started to move, Emma immediately started running as well. In fact, she was physically the weakest of the three. At this moment, her legs were almost out of control. She had been clenching her teeth and supporting herself. But in order to boost morale, she said in a low voice, "Hurry up. Although I don't know what the limit is, the tentacle's length is definitely limited. As long as we run fast enough, we can always escape from its range." Luoboat felt a sense of hope. As expected, his power doubled, and he ran faster than AI Ma while riding on the white. Soon, the three of them escaped to the place where they had escaped to before. The traces left behind here made them relax slightly. White leaned against the wall and turned his head, panting. "There's no sound. It doesn't seem to be chasing us?" Luoboat turned his head and listened carefully. He couldn't help but say, "It seems so. Did we escape?" Aima held her knees and panted desperately. After a while she said, "I don't know, but it's not safe here. We need to run farther." Luoboat muttered, "It should be fine, right? That's where the tentacle retreated." Werther added, "It's moving around quite a bit. If it really chased after us, we would definitely feel it." Aima couldn't help but be anxious, but there was nothing she could do. But in the blink of an eye, an extremely harsh sound wave poured into their ears like a fierce tide. "What's that sound?" Werther let out a blood-curdling scream. The sound wave was very similar to the sound of fingernails scratching glass. After the sound entered their ears, it was as if something was scratching their heads from the inside out. Their whole head felt like it was about to explode. White desperately covered his ears, but it didn't have much effect. Luoboat and Aima weren't spared either. Visible pain appeared on their faces. Fortunately, it didn't last long. When the three of them felt like their heads were about to explode, the sound wave from the direction of the abyss stopped abruptly. Then there was complete silence. There wasn't the slightest sound other than panting. The three of them unconsciously hugged their heads and curled up on the ground. On the other side, Dake immediately took action after the little fiend returned. As mentioned before, he didn't know much about Luoxi's Mobius worm, and couldn't judge whether it could block the second tentacle that appeared. So, in order to give White and the others more space to escape, he launched another attack on the first tentacle on this side. Kettle plus Illusory Beast, Ibu plus Fiend. S series of punches had actually given him a clearer understanding of the overall strength of the first tentacle. With this as a standard, he made a rough calculation. The tentacle's attack power should be above 4,000, but not by much. Its defense was only around 3,000. Its overall strength was close to that of an 8-star magic fairy, but this was only one tentacle. If there was only one tentacle, Dake wouldn't hesitate to destroy it there and then. But the second tentacle that had just appeared had already shown the horror of the abyss. If it wasn't for the three of them, he wouldn't have attacked it further. But since the decision had been made, Dake wouldn't hesitate anymore. When the fiend returned, he made a prompt decision to summon a new companion, Dream Demon. As the Dream Demon's magic card lit up, this newly refined magic fairy was summoned by Dake. Demon Mimi, the dream demon that was more or less the incarnation of bliss, rubbed itself against Dake's face as soon as it appeared. Dake awkwardly pulled it off his face and then took out the next magic card. Bliss 3. The dream demon was only a 3-star level and didn't have much magic reserves in the pearl in front of its chest. Its use in a head-on battle was limited, but once it succeeded in evolving, it would instantly become a nightmare on the battlefield. Dake's hand movements were very fast. Deanna and Luosi were still immersed in the dream demon's cuteness when they were struck down by the dream demon's other kind of cuteness. After summoning the dream demon, Dake quickly said, "Next, I will let my magic fairy use a field skill. At that time, Luosi and I should be faster, but Deanna might not." Deanna. Dake didn't explain but continued. "In short, this increase in speed will be enough to support us to escape quickly in times of crisis. Once you feel that something is wrong, don't hesitate and run immediately." Luosi nodded as if he understood. Deanna's face was still full of question marks. Dake added, "Of course the tentacle's speed should be slower." Then he reached out and touched the dream demon's head. Although its head had a structure that looked like a mage's hat, it was actually a part of its body. The dream demon squinted its eyes, as if it was enjoying the touch. As a magic guide fairy that had just been born last night, its heart was still as pure as a baby's. Dake wasn't at ease to let this inexperienced magic fairy face the enemy. But if it was just a tool to open up the realm, then it was enough to be trusted. "Let's begin." Dake retracted his hand, opening his mouth. "Nightmare Realm, open." Demonic Mimi. After hearing its master's command, the light in the dream demon's eyes instantly converged. It was obviously serious. Along with a cry, thick purple smoke quietly spread out from under his body. It seemed to be slow, but was actually very fast. In a blink of an eye, the fog had spread out to the outside of the tunnel, surrounding the tentacle. The hallucinatory effect of the nightmare realm took effect. The tentacle didn't seem to sense anything wrong. While it stared fixedly at this side, the wound that was pierced by the demon beast was rapidly healing. Once the wound completely healed, it would be time for it to initiate another attack. But it couldn't wait until then. Following the complete expansion of the nightmare realm, the demon beast and the Diru beast couldn't help but frown. These two speedy magic fairies were like sinking into a quagmire within the nightmare realm. Every step was difficult. That tentacle's speed was faster than theirs. It was even more unbearable. Instead, Huhu and Ibuchan were excited. Although Ibuchan was raised to 2 stars under the effects of Pride 2 New, its basic attributes were still insufficient to support it in this battle. Huhu's equal strength split was already in cooldown. The remaining killing moves were equal defense split and power trick. Using power trick to exchange attack and defense, then using equal defense split to lower the tentacle's defense, it will lower its defense to 0. 5. Seizing this artificial moment of weakness, Huhu's 2200 attack power will be enough to deal a heavy blow. But that's not enough. The Diru beast placed down his backpack. Under Dake's command, it walked towards the dream demon. The dream demon circled around it twice, until the Diru beast's brows furrowed. Then, it giggled and shook out a purple fog enveloping it. Then, in front of everyone's eyes, the Diru beast's figure completely disappeared. It immediately made use of its advantage as a cat, and started to move without making a sound. Now that Bliss 3 and Pride 3 had been used, the Diru beast was the magic guide spirit with the highest attack in Dark's hands. If the Dilu beast could get close to the tentacle without being discovered, then the Dilu beast would be able to get close to the tentacle. Although its speed was slowed down by the nightmare realm, but against the slower tentacle, it would definitely be able to coordinate with Huhu to deal a fatal blow. Moreover, Huhu's speed in the nightmare realm was comparable to a high-speed train. According to the basic theory of the greater the speed, the greater the kinetic energy. When it punched out in this state, it would far exceed the limit of 2200 attack power. combining all the factors, calculating all the possibilities, maximizing the attack power. Dake's thoughts were frighteningly clear. Furthermore, his magic guiding fairies were also highly intelligent enough to complete this plan. Huhu's eyes flickered, accumulating power. The Diru beast crouched forward, silently moving forward. The demon beast attracted the tentacle's attention, preparing to deal the final blow at the crucial moment. Demonic Mimi, the dream demon, floated to Dake's side, rubbing against his shoulder. Dake immediately understood. The Diru beast had already reached the edge of the abyss. The tentacle was less than half a meter away from the platform that extended out of the tunnel. The east wind blew, the war drums beat. "I'll leave it to you." Huhu felt like it could instantly traverse hundreds of meters with a thought. Its confidence exploded. After it nodded in agreement, its eyes suddenly burst out with an extremely strong white light. The instantaneous eruption of its superpower caused its attack and defense to exchange. Attack, 0, attack, 2200 defense, 2200 defense, 0. Then, it stuck its head out from behind the wall, fiercely staring at the tentacle. The tentacle's body was once again enveloped by the light of its superpower. The gap between the two sides caused the equal defense effect to only last for a very short period of time. However, Huhu's current speed was enough for it to grasp this flaw. The 4 tentacles under its body fiercely slashed, and its entire body turned into light. As for the Diru beast, when Huhu's body lit up with the light of its superpower, it immediately bent its knees and jumped. It suddenly soared into the air and threw out a cat fist at the tentacle's body that was full of suction cups. The purple mist on its body instantly dispersed when it soared into the air, revealing its snow-white body. In the eyes of Dake and the others, its movements were like slow motion. However, the reaction of the tentacle after discovering it was extremely slow. As the white light of its superpower lit up on the tentacle, Dake's diamond's golden flash, Huhu, instantly rushed forward. Busy. The muscles on its tentacle bulged, as firm as a rock. It violently roared and hit the tentacle that had its defense reduced by half. Boom. 8000/8000? 0/8000? Chapter 346. Huhu had never experienced such a satisfying feeling before. The Nightmare Realm's speed reduction and increase was achieved through distorting space. Huhu's current feeling was like shrinking the ground into an inch. With a single swipe, the entire worm had advanced a long distance. Under such circumstances, it was completely unable to control its own speed. It was simply too fast. The oncoming wind made it squint its eyes, but when it took a step forward, it firmly locked onto the position of the tentacle, and the fist it swung out almost immediately felt solid. Boom. The loud noise that shocked even itself was instantly followed by the impact of the fist's feedback. A destructive force that exceeded the numerical value penetrated through the tentacle's skin. In a blink of an eye, the skin was smashed into smithereens. Then, without a trace of delay, the flesh behind was smashed into fine powder. This fist produced a violent shockwave, causing the surrounding body to be smashed into smithereens. A bloody wound that connected the front and back of the tentacle suddenly appeared. Huhu stared at the destruction it caused, but the reaction force still sent it flying backwards. Remember the website, VIP, can't you? VIP. The honest and steady child actually exposed a trace of complacent smirk. After that, like a slow-motion movie, the Dilu beast followed up with a cat fist. As the Dilu beast's only attack technique, the might of the cat fist was unquestionable. The claw set on its hand was replicated from the ultimate digital beast, the Golden Sword Lion's claw data. It possessed a sharpness that could tear through anything. Originally, even if the tentacle's defense wasn't reduced by half, it still wouldn't be able to withstand the Dilu beast's razor-sharp claws. But now it was directly torn apart. The rock-hard skin was like tofu in front of it, easily torn apart. After this claw, the huge wound on the tentacle that Huhu blasted out expanded, and half of its body was completely torn apart. Above and below the tentacle, only a layer of flesh was left. The upper half of its body tilted and collapsed. That tongue with a mouth let out a hurried hiss. A large ball of pitch-black fog erupted from the broken part of its body, attempting to reconnect the two parts. But a black shadow flashed. The devil beast's huge body appeared behind the broken tentacle, without any warning. With a sinister smile, the demonic beast swung its sharp demonic claws at the remaining layer of flesh. Meow. The Dilu beast used the force to bounce back into the tunnel. When it landed, it immediately raised its head and saw that the upper half of the tentacle was completely broken and was about to fall to the bottom of the abyss. After losing its head, the lower half of its body also showed signs of retracting to the bottom of the abyss. With the combined power of the 4 magic guide fairies, they finally severed the tentacle. However, the Dilu beast was very clear about Dake's intentions. Its eyes immediately looked towards the tunnel on the left side of the wall. The second tentacle was still inside. It was also at this moment that an ear-piercing sound wave came from that direction. The Dilu beast's hearing was sharper than an ordinary person's. When the sound wave entered its brain, it instantly felt a stinging pain. It couldn't help but cover its head. The demonic beast that was flying in the air was also stimulated by the sound waves and fell down. The power of darkness overflowed from its head. What's that sound? In that instant, Dake instinctively covered its ears, trying to reduce the influence of the sound waves. Deanna, Luosi, and the rest of the magic guide fairies also covered their ears. Only Luosi was a bit puzzled when she covered her ears. Although she had never heard a similar sound before, she still felt a sense of familiarity, due to the connection between them. Could it be a Mobius worm? Just as the 6 people in the 2 groups were puzzled by the sound waves, in the tunnel on the left side of the wall, the second tentacle's body suddenly rolled together like a wave. Countless layers of wrinkles appeared on its skin full of suction cups. Then, the tentacle was forcefully blasted away, until its head was also sent flying out of the tunnel. It couldn't stop its violent trembling. Only then did the sound waves from the tunnel abruptly stop. It really is a Mobius worm? Dake and the other 2 immediately understood the truth. Luosi tightly gripped the magic card in her hand. She felt the magic power of the Mobius worm rapidly depleting. While she was puzzled, she was also pleasantly surprised. This was the first time she had sent out her magic guide fairy in an actual battle. After experimenting, the Mobius worm was the only surekill skill that she understood the most. This let her know that her 3-star magic guide fairy had a defense ability that surpassed stars. However, she had only experimented with the energy scale and the ultrasonic wave separately once. Since the Mobius worm's attack was 0, the ultrasonic wave didn't have any attack bonus. Its power was extremely limited, or even none at all. As for the energy scale, it seemed to her that it was more like a supplementary skill of the Mobius worm. When the Mobius worm withstood the impact, the energy scale would rise. From 1 to 7, there were a total of 7 scales. Once it reached the peak, it meant that the Mobius worm had reached its limit. Other than that, it didn't have much use. But if the sound wave just now was really released by the Mobius worm, Luosi suddenly realized that her research on her magic guide fairy might be far from enough. But looking at the current situation, the Mobius worm's extraordinary performance might not be a good thing. At this moment, Dake's magic guide fairy used all its strength to cut off the first tentacle. Although the second tentacle was blasted away, it was obvious that it didn't suffer too much damage. Perhaps because it was too aggrieved in front of the Mobius worm, it didn't have the slightest intention of going back into the tunnel. Instead, it stared at Dake and the other 2. Even though the tentacle didn't have eyes, it gave off a very obvious feeling that it was spying on them. But in other words, the white side should be safe, right? They won't court death again. Dake quickly shut his mouth. This wasn't a good flag. He wasn't particularly nervous. If they really couldn't beat it, they could just run. With the dream demon holding the fort, the tentacle couldn't catch up to them. A tactical retreat wasn't shameful. Tactical retreat. Dake took a deep breath. He was really prepared to run. Continuing to tangle with the tentacle, other than gaining some combat experience, was meaningless. The demon beast and the Diru beast received the order, and immediately began to retreat. After seeing this scene, the tentacle suddenly let out a sharp hiss. Then, like a poisonous snake coming out of its hole, it pounced in an instant. This action made Dake instantly realize the second tentacle and the first tentacle should have an independent consciousness. They might really be two tentacles of an individual, but their form of existence shouldn't be the same as the octopus squid he had imagined. Instead, it should be similar to the structure of the Hydra's head. When he thought of the Hydra, Dake thought of a possibility. It can't be that it has the characteristic of having to cut off all the heads at the same time to kill it, right? He hurriedly suppressed this thought. The strength of this hidden space was obviously much higher than the second level of the underground city. Even if the monsters hidden at the bottom of the abyss were really so powerful and difficult to deal with, it was a problem that only the senior students had to face. In short, it had nothing to do with him. Yo-yo, let's go. After making up his mind, Dake immediately picked up the backpack and the rusted sword at his feet. When he let the Diru beast do it for him, he didn't feel it at all. When he carried it himself, Dake realized that the backpack was really heavy, but the rusted sword was much lighter than he imagined. He held the sword in his hand and let Diana and Luosi run first, while he prepared to cover the rear. Luosi nodded slightly and injected magic into the magic card. As the magic card lit up, the Mobius worm turned into light and disappeared, returning to the surface of the card. Diana shook the backpack on her body and pulled herself together. Let's run. This time she ran very nimbly. The two girls started running at the same time. Diana, who was full of confidence, was left behind by Luosi in a blink of an eye. W. Diana was stunned for a moment, but seeing Luosi's back quickly disappearing, she hurriedly started running again. Wait. They were obviously running away, but the atmosphere was unusually relaxed. Dake couldn't help but laugh. Oh, it's not running away, it's a tactical retreat. Then it's fine. He peeked his head out to take a look. The hissing sound of the tentacle was still echoing in his ears, giving a feeling that it was very angry and very fierce. But at this moment, it was like a fish on a chopping board, struggling and wriggling in the nightmare realm. Before the first tentacle had the chance to experience the mysteries of the nightmare realm, it had already been beheaded. This second tentacle was fortunate enough to experience it. But as soon as it rushed into the range of the nightmare realm, its movement speed became abnormally slow. The Diru beast and the demon beast were very vigilant at first, but they didn't expect the ferocious tentacle to suddenly turn into a snail. The two magic guiding fairies secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Although their movement speed was slowed, but compared to the tentacle, it was still within an acceptable range. The two magic guiding fairies retreated to a corner, disappearing from the tentacle's vision. I'll leave the rest to you. Dake stroked the dream demon's head and said seriously. The dream demon nodded its head, expressing that it was completely adorable. Same as me. Dake smiled slightly, bringing the Diru beast and the demon beast. A tactical retreat. Apart from the Diru beast, the demon beast and the dream demon, the other magic guiding fairies were all kept back into their magic cards. Not long later, Dake ran out of the range of the nightmare realm. But he didn't notice that after his figure completely disappeared from the field of vision, the dream demon opened its mouth. Demon Mimi, although it had restrained itself after evolving, the inner nature of the dream demon was still that mischievous dream demon. It tilted its head and secretly glanced at the wriggling tentacle. It actually swaggered out from the corner. *__**. Hee. After the tentacle saw it clearly, it slowly opened its 8-petaled mouth, issuing a threatening hiss towards the dream demon. But the dream demon shrunk its neck, glancing left and right. After realizing that the hiss was just a hiss, it mustered its courage and flew towards the tentacle. When it neared, it lifted up its ribbon-like body and poked the tentacle's mouth like a hand. Then it retracted back with a bayou sound. It was like touching something scalding hot. Demon Mimi? After realizing that it wasn't injured, the dream demon became even more daring. It started to touch the 8-petaled mouth's fine teeth, the viscous saliva that flowed out, and the corrosive fluid that was squeezed out from within. In short, wherever it was curious, it poked. Anyway, the tentacle's speed in the nightmare realm would never be able to catch up to it. Its laughter traveled into the abyss, echoing from time to time. It practically touched the entire body of the tentacle. The humiliated tentacle displayed a strong intention to struggle. The dream demon could clearly feel that its nightmare realm was slightly shaking because of this. It could be seen that as long as it had enough strength, it could break free from this realm and return to its original speed. But it wasn't afraid. The nature of a magic guiding sprite determined that it wouldn't face too much danger of death. After the dream demon understood this point, it no longer had any restraints in its heart. If it stuck its head out, it would stab its head. Anyway, it wouldn't die no matter what it did. Why not do it to its heart's content? Therefore, it immediately played a "you hit me, I'll hit you too" game with the tentacle. Of course, it was only the tentacle that was hit. After the first tentacle was chopped off, the second tentacle was trapped and humiliated. The black fog at the bottom of the abyss was silent for a while. Finally, there was some movement. When the two familiar red lights shined up, it signified the sudden attack of the third tentacle. Hua! As if it had drilled out from the water, the third tentacle's body was flowing with a large amount of mucus. The dream demon immediately stopped its teasing, slowly floating over the second tentacle's head, and looking at the third tentacle. Demonic Mimi? It slightly tilted its head, its face filled with curiosity. Gee! Following the appearance of the third tentacle, the second tentacle's struggle suddenly became much more intense. The purple fog within the nightmare realm started to churn because of this. The dream demon floated in the air, its graceful body gently swaying. The 3 gems embedded in its body faintly glowed. He did not panic because of the instability of the nightmare realm. But following that, the third tentacle that was thicker and longer than the second tentacle, its tip split into 8 petals. It was the same pattern, but after the third tentacle split open, it looked more like a flower of flesh than the first 2 tentacles. It aimed the flower of flesh at the dream demon, and at the center of the flower, an eye quietly opened. Suddenly, a pitch-black light beam illuminated the vision. The dream demon only felt a slight pain, and its body was penetrated by the light beam. Mission: Fusion/Evolution 4000+/16,000. The last day of the month. If you don't vote, the ticket will expire. Chapter 347. Due to its lack of combat experience, the dream demon did not react in advance when the eye in the stamen opened. When it regained consciousness, it was already too late to dodge. Only the mechanism installed in its brain could be triggered. This allowed it to successfully use a sure kill skill before it was hit. Same fate. The next moment, the sudden attack of the pitch-black light beam instantly penetrated its body. The parts below the ruby directly disappeared. A total of 2,700 points of magic was instantly exhausted. It could not even use shared pain. Only the successful, same fate, could be triggered. A portion of the dream demon's mana dissipated, and was sucked back into the dream demon's body, forming a deep purple mana whirlpool below it. That magic whirlpool expanded to the limit in a flash, even exceeding the range of the nightmare realm, as if it wanted to swallow everything. A mysterious and terrifying aura suddenly erupted. Same fate was a curse that involved the power of fate. It would cause the opponent that was on the verge of death or heavily injured to suffer the same fate. Remember in a second. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP in the language of Buddhism, this was the so-called karma. This curse was close to the law. The sequence was extremely high. The third tentacle that bloomed with flesh and blood, after releasing the light beam, slightly retracted, as if it was reaccumulating power. As for the second tentacle within the nightmare realm, it was obviously affected by the magic whirlpool, shockingly stopping its squirming. Boom! Under the gaze of the 2 tentacles, the deep purple magic whirlpool suddenly disappeared without a trace after its aura erupted. The inside and outside of the abyss instantly became deathly silent. At this moment, the dream demon was already on the verge of death, completely relying on the characteristics of the ghost-type magic elf to support its last trace of consciousness. Its body parts above the ruby swayed in the wind. Its eyes following the disappearance of the magic whirlpool turned towards the abyss. It did not look at the second tentacle that was close to it. It also did not look at the third tentacle that was far away. It directly looked at the bottom of the abyss that was covered in black fog. From the black fog, there were two red lights that were like two huge eyes. Every time a tentacle drilled out, this pair of eyes would open, releasing a dazzling red light. But at this moment, the two red lights had already disappeared. The bottom of the abyss was pitch black. The black fog that covered the top suddenly rolled, gradually becoming more and more violent. The two tentacles that were still outside also showed abnormal movements at the same time. As the nightmare realm gradually disappeared, the second tentacle that regained its speed suddenly retracted back into the black fog like a snake. The third tentacle that bloomed with flesh and blood swayed its body in the air. The eyes on the stamen emitted a flickering light. But immediately, all of a sudden, it froze in place. The opposite. The surrounding walls suddenly shook. The walls and passages in the entire space shook violently, as if they would collapse at any moment. The layer of black mist that covered the abyss was suddenly washed away by the black water that emerged from the bottom, revealing the pitch-black swamp below. Through the surface of the water, one could faintly see a huge black shadow to the abyss of the abyss of the abyss of. To the abyss to the abyss to the abyss. Thousands of waves were stirred up in the abyss. The huge monster that was sleeping underground was suddenly awakened. It stood up in horror, came out of the water, and instinctively let out a hoarse and unpleasant howl. The howl that filled the space turned into fear and pain at a speed visible to the naked eye. With its brain, it probably couldn't understand it. Why would he, who had been sleeping peacefully in the abyss, suddenly encounter such an unexpected calamity? As for the tentacles, that was the individual behavior of the tentacles. What did it have to do with its body? With the support of countless tentacles, the huge monster rushed out of the water. The water outlet that surrounded the wall seemed to be just enough to accommodate it. Its diameter was close to 100 meters. After its body propped up, it was 200 to 300 meters tall. The shape of its body was very different from the octopus, squid, or hydra that Dake guessed. Its appearance was more like a jellyfish. The surface of its mushroom-shaped body was full of ring-shaped protrusions. When it rushed out of the water, the ring-shaped protrusions split open a gap, squeezing out a wet scarlet eyeball. The rolling eyeballs emitted a dazzling red light. At this moment, the light was distorted, like a group of demons dancing. And under the mushroom-shaped body, there were thousands of horrifying tentacles. These tentacles had the intention to act independently when it was asleep. But once the body woke up and took over control, the tentacles were just tentacles. However, this didn't constitute a reason for it to separate the tentacles from the body. The tentacles committed a crime. As the body, it must bear the curse of fate. Unfortunately, at this moment, no one saw this shocking scene. The huge monster that just came out of the water split open from the top of its mushroom-shaped body to both sides without warning. Dirty dark red blood spurted out of the huge split open wound, and instantly dyed the walls of the abyss red. The blood rushed and quickly flowed away. When the jellyfish-like monster's body split open on both sides, it shriveled up at a speed visible to the eye. Countless eyeballs rolled wildly, with panic and confusion in their eyes. Boom! The shriveled body that lost blood fell into the water. Dense tentacles wriggled at the bottom of the water. Huge eyeballs rolled out of the eye sockets and condensed into stones. The mournful wailing stopped abruptly, leaving only weak gasps. It didn't die, but it was almost dying. The entire abyss was dyed red. Blood mist rose from the water. The monster was struggling at death's door. But it didn't die in the end. Once it woke up, it began to absorb the mist and water. The eyeballs that rolled in the water were sucked into its mouth. After a cycle, they grew out from the surface of its body. Countless tentacles extended from the cut surface of its split body. These tentacles tangled and pulled the two halves of its body back together. After it was barely mended, this terrifying demonic creature actually fled into the depths of the water in a panic, quickly escaping through another opening at the bottom of the water. The shaking intensified. After this hidden space was no longer suppressed by the monster, it finally began to collapse. At the moment when the dream demon was attacked, Dake, who had already escaped some distance, suddenly stopped. He frowned and pulled out the dream demon's magic card from his sleeve. With the infusion of magic, some basic information flowed back. There's not much magic left. It was attacked. Same fate triggered. After a moment, the lines of the dream demon quietly appeared on the originally empty surface of the card. But the dream demon that reappeared on the card lost its color. This was the appearance of the magic fairy after its death. To restore its color, it needed to be carefully replenished with magic. If he wanted to summon it again, he would have to wait for more time. Dake used his fingertips to draw a magic circle, steadily injecting magic. The dream demon being attacked was more or less within his expectations. But the fact that it was instantly killed was beyond his expectations. And same fate. Triggering was within reason. Not only did he not panic, but he was also very curious. Which unlucky bastard triggered same fate? Was it one of the tentacles? With that in mind, Dark glanced at the direction of the abyss. No matter which unlucky bastard it was, it had nothing to do with him anymore. Once he left this hidden space, today's encounter would only become a picture in a book. But suddenly, the surroundings shook violently. He quickly supported himself against the wall. The Dilu beast and the demon beast immediately raised their vigilance. Then not long after, the entire passageway collapsed. The demon beast suddenly opened its wings, trying to use its body as a protective umbrella for its master. However, those collapsed bricks directly passed through the solid object after coming into contact with it. The demon beast looked up in shock and couldn't help but stretch out its huge sharp demon claws, poking at the falling bricks. Its fingers naturally passed through. So big, still so pure. The Dilu beast took the opportunity to hug Dake's arm, disdaining the demon beast's childish behavior. But Dake felt warmth in his heart because the demon beast took the initiative to act as a protective umbrella. His eyes flickered, quietly watching the collapse of the entire passage. It was as if he was watching the end of the world. The collapse of the passage quickly radiated to the place where Deanna and Luosi were. After the two summoned their magic fairy to resist, they discovered that the bricks were not a threat at all. So they also stopped and watched curiously. On the other side of the passage, White and the other two didn't seek death again. They rested for a moment at the place where they stopped and waited for the passage to collapse. Amidst the turbulent emotions of the 6 people, Yi Zichen and the others, the collapse of the passage lasted for a full 3 minutes. Then all the buildings in sight turned into fine specks of light. When they stretched out their hands, they could feel the specks of light passing through their palms. It was clearly the sadness of objects disappearing, but it revealed a dreamlike beauty. Dake Deming leaned back and leaned on the demon beast's body. After the Dilu beast grabbed his arm, it didn't let go. Although time was passing, it made people feel eternity. They couldn't help but have this thought. If it stayed at this moment forever, it wouldn't be bad. But everything would pass in the end. The complete disappearance of the hidden space exposed the true appearance of the second floor of the underground city. The walls were full of ruins after being eroded by time. The vines that grew in the cracks of the walls. The glowing moss that covered the ceiling. The weeds in the corners and cracks. There was obviously such an obvious difference. But it wasn't until the hidden space disappeared that they realized it. What should we do next? Dake continued to inject magic, feeling the dream demon gradually wake up, and he had some ideas in his mind. Dilu beast, go and bring Deanna and Luosi back. The master's order had to be obeyed. The Dilu beast reluctantly let go, and then rushed in the direction of Deanna and Luosi. It jumped on the walls in the passage, and didn't slow down when it turned. Not long after, it met Deanna and Luosi, who were also rushing here. The 3 of them soon met up. When Diana asked him what had happened with an adorable look on her face, Lin Mingyao asked him what had happened. Dake had already learned some information from the dream demon's mouth. He chose his words carefully and said, maybe the monster hidden under the abyss suffered a backlash, and the hidden space that existed because of it completely collapsed. I'm now going to follow the previous route to the location of the abyss. What do you think? Backlash? What does that mean? Luosi asked curiously. Dake briefly explained. It's a killing skill that can make people suffer the same amount of damage. I didn't expect it to be effective against a monster of that level. Luosi lowered his head thoughtfully. Deanna thought for a while, and then said excitedly, I understand we're going to pick up treasures, right? Dake nodded with a smile. Yes, let's see if the monster left anything behind when it was on the verge of death. If there's a little bit left, it'll be a surprise for us. After that, the three of them groped their way in the direction of the abyss. Returning to the second layer of the underground city, the appearance of monsters was inevitable. But under the Dilu Beast's cat fist, no monster could withstand one move. They quickly harvested the monster's materials, and soon arrived at the original location of the abyss. But someone arrived one step earlier than them. White Luo Boat and Aima also chose to grope their way back after the hidden space collapsed. The three of them walked out of another tunnel, and the original location of the abyss had changed back to an ordinary fork in the road. The passageways that extended from all directions converged here, creating a relatively spacious space. The size of this open space was naturally smaller than the abyss. But in the underground city, it was enough for a large group of people to rest. Once again, the three of them were as cautious as mice in a house, relying on the magic elf to explore the way. Fortunately, they didn't encounter any monsters, and arrived here before Dake's group. What's that? Aima, who was the first to poke her head out, couldn't help but whisper. White then poked her head out, and found a round stone in the open space. The stone was half the height of a person, and there was a crack in the middle. From the crack, a scarlet light shone out, and it was frightening. 8,000/16,000 replenishment. Today's mission. Let's finish it first. Anyway, I'll definitely have at least 4,000. I can't owe any more. I have to admit I'm trash. It's a new January, monthly votes are still required. It seems like I haven't asked for a recommendation vote in half a year. I'll ask for one today. Are there free razor blades? Next update 4,000 before dinner, I'll try to do it earlier. 2021 has a good start. First place in monthly sales and monthly ranking. Thank you everyone. I'll work harder in February. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.